non-intervention in your own.
We'd like to present you a check of $8,524.02, and we hope that our plan succeeds and we can work with you to build a memorial.
And we would also like to thank everyone who has donated and supported us in this cause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mayor and council members, for giving us this time to present our gifts.
I am simply taken by each and every one of you. It says a lot for the efforts that you went out. I have, over the years, been involved in the community in organizations. What you did to put this together and to raise the funds, do you know how many times an organization struggles just to raise funds for a certain cause or an issue or for something that is needed for the organization? But you took it upon yourselves. We had a tragedy, and you wanted to turn it around and leave something positive so that the members of this community could be proud of it. You didn't need to be challenged, but you did it anyway. It is such an honor. Would someone from the fire department please join me to accept the check? And then I'm going to have Vice Mayor Reyes stand and help me in just a moment.
While the mayor's headed down, I just want to thank you for your commitment to teamwork and to set your mind to a goal and accomplish something. I think that even with your presentation here, you nailed your presentation. You were able to get all your words across just exactly the way you wanted to, and I commend you for that, and I thank you for the effort.
Give yourself a round of applause. We'll deposit that tomorrow. Okay. As Vice Mayor doesn't honor oath, this is a challenge coin. On behalf of the city of Porterville, Vice Mayor and I are going to challenge you to continue the efforts that you do. So we don't touch it. We're going to have you pick one, and always remember that this is a challenge by accepting the coin. That you will do this once again as you really did, that you will repeat it in the future. Thank you very much. Go ahead and take the challenge coin. I know it. We're very proud of you. Thank you very much. Oh, of course. I wish I could shake your hand. I wish I could. I wish I could do all of that. What is it that they're doing, the elbow now? We can do that, okay? Thank you very much. That was nice. Okay. We will now move on to oral communications. This is the opportunity to address the council on any matter of interest, whether on the agenda or not. Please address all items not scheduled for public hearing at this time. Unless additional time is authorized by the council, all commentary shall be limited to 3 minutes. If you are here for the public hearings, number 20, 21, 22, please hold your comments until those items are on the agenda. You will be given the opportunity at that time. Are there any oral communications? Please come forward. State your name and address, please.
Hello, my name is Chad Taylor. I live at 205 Chase Avenue. I just had a question regarding the skate park here in town. I noticed that some places are opening back up for, like, you know, things like the dine-in and stuff like that. And I was wondering if there's any time frame or estimation of when a skate park might open.
Right now, we're still with the executive order, and we still don't have that information. But if you leave your phone number, do you do anything on social media?
No.
Okay, well, because they usually post the information on there.
Okay.
But if you could give your phone number, or you could give, so that somebody could contact you,
Okay.
please.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forth for oral communications? Do we have any that have been sent in?
There's been none received, Your Honor.
None received. Thank you very much. Okay, then we will move on. This is the time for all committee, commission, board reports, subcommittee reports, and staff informational items. City commission and committee meetings. I don't believe we have any. The question that I have, and maybe it doesn't need to be answered now, but if there are any plans for any of the commission to meet, and will their meetings be accessible to the public? And that's all I'm going to say to that regard. Then we move on into the AB 1234 reports. This is the time for all AB 1234 reports required pursuant to Government Code 53232.3. Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO, that would be mine. The meeting was very short and very brief. It was held on June the 3rd via teleconference. City manager and I participated. It was the approval of the April 1st, 2020 minutes. There were no public comments. What was on the agenda for action was the 2020-2021 final budget. Pursuant to Government Code 56381, the commission had to adopt a proposed budget and work program for the following fiscal year by May the 1st. The public hearing, there were no public comments. The action, it was passed unanimous 5-0. The other item for action was the cancellation of the July 1st meeting, which passed unanimous. Legislative update was brief. The next meeting is for August the 5th, 2020. We now move on to the Eastern Tule Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. The GSA met on the 4th of June. I attended via Zoom. There were a couple of items that we took action on. One of the items was to add 2 members, a member and an alternate, to the Tule Subbasin Technical Advisory Committee, which the member, Steve Etchegary, was voted on as member, and Matthew Watkins was voted on as the alternate. As well, we continued work on our, there was a cheat sheet that is meant to answer questions for a variety of instances that pertain to groundwater within the GSA. And so that is for use, again, for a variety of questions and situations depending on what you've drafted and over the course of time. So it's a pretty thorough document. And then I'd like to ask Mr. Knight if he had anything that he wanted to add.
Mr. Knight, are you there?
I'm sorry, Mike, whatever you're trying to say isn't coming through on the feed.
In essence, those were the two items, and there was
Okay.
continued work on the policy for recharge as well. But those are the two main items that we
Okay.
discussed.
Thank you very much. As you talk about water, and we go into the Tulare County Water Commission meeting, there are always programs, or there's always something that there's a connectivity. The Water Commission meeting was on June the 8th. Supervisor Vanderpool had called the meeting. It was virtual to order. The minutes of May 11th were unanimously approved. The meeting was overall informative. There was an update on the Yedem-Savell CSD. Denise England reported that the item would be on the Board of Supervisor agenda for June 9th to approve the MOU with Yedem-Savell Community Services District for the completion of the project, the Yedem-Savell water systems from the county to the district with pertinent documents. I believe they had the meeting on the 9th and it was approved. The CV SALT stands for the Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability. It was presented and has to do in the Cahuilla Basins. Sarah Rutherford expressed that this program is a stakeholder-driven program to develop salinity and nitrate management planning for the Central Valley. She explained that it has been over a decade of collaborative work. The State Water Board approved the CV Salts Basin Plan amendments, providing the regional board with revised flexible authorities for nitrate regulation, including the development of alternative ways for compliance with the state water regulations. There was a brief highlight of the traditional water board permitting options, in addition to the priority groundwater subbasins for CV salts implementation, the management zone geographic area for nitrate compliance, and the responsibility for providing safe drinking water for nitrate-impacted communities. The identification of nitrate-contaminated municipal and domestic wells, and that there was a plan to assure emergency safe drinking water for those impacted, with the funding sources being federal, state, local, and other. A timeline overview, a proposal is the stakeholder outreach part of the presentation and reaching out to the Water Commission. Other parties would be counties, self-help, GSAs. Discharger outreach were the dairies, the cities, and the food processors. Currently seeking input for industry and community leaders to develop governance structure and funding sources. Their next steps would be the formation of a management zone, the governance, the boundary, the funding mechanism, and to submit the management zone proposal to the regional board. The questions that were asked, since this was a plan that aligns with several of others, the GSAs, and perhaps is what they could be doing with the participation and the collaboration. It was discussed that there would be continued dialogue. Brought to the table were water funding projects for the disadvantaged communities, and that was just a summary of where the funds come from for all the water projects, for example, drinking water, the revolving fund, the small community drinking water, wastewater would be the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, Prop 1, technical assistance, the United States Department of Agriculture and Department of Water Resources, the California Infrastructure and Economic Development, the California Department of Housing and Community Development. There was a lengthy discussion as to each of those items, but it was informational, and it was strictly focused as to the types of funds and loans and grants for those projects. Brief update on legislation. The next meeting is scheduled for July 13, and that concludes that report. The League of Cities SSJV Division meeting. Did any council member participate?
I sent him a message, texting John now.
Okay, we can hear you now. I don't know what,
We're having some technical issues on our end, but we can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
yeah, we,
Sorry about that. It's okay.
Okay. Did any council member attend the League of Cities division meeting? Okay. Well, the information that I got was, there were 3 aces from the region: Michael Washam, Curtis Williamson, and our very own Jason Ridenauer. That's wonderful news. Where did he go? Where's Jason? I thought so, but I walked in and I was able to tell him, hello, Ace, he's one of the 3. Thank you very much. Good work. And on the Tulare County Association of Governments, the meeting is on June 22nd and not June the 15th. We will now go into the staff informational report.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just one staff informational report, which is your monthly water conservation phase 4 status update. We had a very good month again. In the month of May, we saw 33% conservation, which is now a running total of 26.8%, exceeding the 26% goal for the city of Porterville. There were 35 notices of violations and no citations.
Thank you very much.
And I guess I would say this is always appreciate the community's support in its continued conservation.
Yeah, thank you. We will now go into the consent calendar. All consent calendar items are considered routine and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these matters unless a request is made, in which event the item will be removed from the consent calendar. All items removed from the consent calendar for further discussion will be heard at the end of scheduled matters. Council, items 1 through 19.
I move to approve the consent calendar, items 1 through 19.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Was that motion made by Councilmember Peñalosa?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and a second by Councilmember Garola. No further discussion. Please call for vote.
Councilmember Garola,
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa,
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Reyes,
Aye.
Mayor Flores.
Aye. Passes unanimous, 5-0. Thank you very much. We will now go into the public hearing.
Thank you, Your Honor. There are 3 public hearings that have been calendared for this evening. The first is to consider the review of cost recovery and special assessment approval for 472 North Villa Street, and Ms. Byers will provide that staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Lawless, Mayor and council members. The subject site is 472 North Villa, shown on your screen. Sorry, council members who aren't in attendance tonight, you cannot see that. It has, when we started to take it through this process to what it looks like today, it is a single-family residential structure. It's been the subject of the city's code enforcement efforts since 2012, when a fire damaged substantial portions of the home. In 2015, staff initiated the process of receivership, given that the structure had become a public health hazard and nuisance. The city hired Silver and Wright as special counsel to assist in the receivership process. Since that time, the property has changed hands multiple times, and numerous court hearings have been filed in an attempt to correct the many property violations. The current property owner has completed a majority of the improvements, as you can see from the photos. They also provided some interior as well, so council is able to review that. So on February 14, 2020, the city sent the property owner an invoice for the fees and costs incurred by the city to abate the code violations. The property owner then filed a new lawsuit against the city for declaratory relief and an accounting of the city's fees and costs. Attached to the staff report is a memo from Silver and Wright outlining the history as well as the cost, as well as a response from the property owner. At this time, it's recommended that the city council open the public hearing to consider the nuisance abatement cost recovery amount of $76,101.39 and approve the levying of a special assessment for that or a lesser modified amount against the nuisance property. Available by phone is both Amanda Jones with Silver and Wright, as well as Mr. Vargas' attorney, Andrew Slater. And I have them on the phone, and so what I'll do is I'll put the microphone near them, but allow council to ask questions first. Okay.
Okay, it is 7:13, and we will open up the public hearing.
Your Honor, I'd like to speak on this, but I'd like to, if we're going to hear something from the attorney, and the other one, I'd like to hear that first before I open my mouth. Some testimony?
Administrative hearing. I think it's really for the purpose of the administrative hearing is for, it's not a public hearing for everybody, it's an administrative hearing between the owner and the city. on the thing.
Public hearing.
Well, if you, what I would suggest is this then, since he wasn't able to speak during oral communications, I would say you need to go ahead and
Yeah.
speak now.
Actually, and that brings up another thing. I apologize. I went out, had a drink of water, and I congratulated the kids. I missed public oral communications, and I would really like to talk on item 24, or wait, 25. Is there, if the council will allow me, I can either do it now, or I can ask then, or I don't do it at all. I'm in support of it, I'd like to say it. I'd also like to say something about this item.
Legal counsel?
It's up to you. I mean, you can go ahead and, since he missed oral communications, you can just have him do his oral communications now.
That would be
And then
great.
you can go ahead and speak on both, and then you're done.
Yeah, I won't take a long time. I'll do this one real quick. This item in particular, I read the staff report. I'm actually a court-appointed receiver myself, and for you who've been around a while, we've had this issue before when we did the drive-in, and we contemplated receivership back then. I'm going to say that it doesn't look like it's worked out real well for us, but there are other ways to do receivership. In the situation in the drive-in, it took me 2.5 years, and I expended $44,000 of my own money, and then got paid $19,000 to do it. So there are ways, in the future, there are ways to do this without incurring $76,000 worth of expenses. The receiver can just take it upon himself to advance the money, get the asset in working order, and sell it, which is what we probably should have done here. Even in 2016, the house was well worth more than $27,000. That's what I did. That's what I'm doing right now with the receivership case I'm in now. I'm not trying to tell the receivers how to do their business. I'm just saying that it would prevent this. The other issue with something like this is, anyway, it's just $76,000. How much of it is actually fines, and how much of it is something else? Mr. Laws and I have had a discussion way back when that anytime we assess something, it would be easy if we just assessed it and then put it on the rolls. Then there's no question. It's a title cloud. It can be cleared up. I think the problem with some of these things is that you don't even know what the fees are until the city brings it to them. So we could, had we had some of these fees already assessed, even when the original property owner bought the property, he would be aware, or even if he wasn't aware, it would be documented that these fees were against it. I think that's a better way to do things, because what happens a lot of times when we do things is that we come down here and then we go to turn our water on and we find out there's a hidden fee for, although we're a lot better about it, for 15 or 20,000, well, 3 or 4 or 5,000, whatever. Maria has helped me out on before, that you're not aware of. And I've always advocated that maybe we should just file them as we get them. And we've done that a lot more now, so that when I go to research the property, I see what fees are against it. Now I'm going to run over to this cannabis one real quick, and then I'll get out of you guys' hair. I thought this was great. I saw who did it, and it was John Lawless, and it made sense, because I don't know if anybody knows the history here, but what happened is my recollection of this is 2 years ago we were considering this. But the concern was we had the tax measure on for some of our public safety officers, and the concern from the consultant was if we had 2 tax measures on the same ballot, sometimes voters get tax weary, and then they vote against both of them. So the thinking at that time was that we would just do the one that was most important to us, which was for the general fund, which was good, and that we would, before 2 years were up, we would come up with this hybrid development agreement model, which would enable us to basically do the marijuana, and 3 piece, the marijuana ordinance too. So that's what we came up with, and it took longer than it is. Here we are at 2 years. 2 years again. We're going for the election again. But the thing with the development agreement is it's very complicated, and there's a lot of negotiation in it. Whereas if it's just a straight tax measure, it's a lot more cut and dry. So if we could get this on the ballot and get this passed, there's a lot of benefits, especially for a guy like me. I don't have to negotiate for the next 6 months exactly what it is. I know what it is. Also, because the way I read in the staff report, It also allows other aspects of it. Right now, we can only do retail. If this were to pass, we could do distributing, manufacturing, cultivation, testing, which opens a whole nother group of potential revenue for the city instead of this very small, limited thing. We can keep the development agreement, model in our back pocket. If the tax measure doesn't pass for whatever reason, we can still go back to development. But if we can get this on the ballot, I think it's a lot more beneficial. I was at the store in Farmersville that they opened up, and I talked to some, and I was standing in line, and I found some of the people from Fresno. I didn't realize Fresno doesn't have any marijuana. We have to get this up and going, because as soon as somebody else, Fresno, Visalia, or whatever, gets in, the pot's going to get thinner and thinner and thinner. So I think it's a good idea if we can get it on there. I think that it opens up a lot of avenues, and I think that it's a better model. In our development agreement, there's a 5-year, and then it runs out. With the tax measure, as long as you're in compliance, you're in business. I think it's a better way to do it. All right, the last one is, again, no out-of-towners. No out-of-towners in this thing, no matter who we pick, because what I've been hearing now is the new model is to basically, kind of like franchises, to just go to these small towns, get these cannabis licenses. Don't really try to do anything, but kind of just skim off the top the money from that town, and then have an IPO, sell your stocks, and you become a spoke in a wheel. And we don't want to be that. We don't want to be a spoke in somebody else's wheel. We want to be the wheel. Thank you for your.
Thank you very much. Now, since the public hearing was opened, we will now go ahead and open the public hearing.
So you can proceed with the administrative hearing.
Yes, we can proceed now with the administrative hearing.
I'm not sure which one of you wants to start, but you do have a speaker adjacent to the phone, and council can hear you.
Amanda, do you mind if I go first? Hello? This is Andy Slater, attorney for Mr. Vargas. I hope you guys can hear me. I have to admit I was having a lot of trouble hearing everything that's been said so far, and I apologize if I missed anything, it's too bad that I couldn't be there in person. Mr. Vargas and I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time, hopefully to read what I have prepared. I tried to make it as straightforward as possible. I won't take a lot of your time tonight. I know it's late and everybody, you guys have long meetings and have a lot of stuff to do. The issue that Mr. Vargas has with these fees is that first of all, the overwhelming majority of them are attorney's fees and not costs incurred by the city necessarily in the process of abating the nuisance or inspecting this property. And if you look at the breakdown that I did, there's about $58,000 worth of the 76 that are just flat out not recoverable against my client. The most recent motion that the city filed to have the receiver reappointed, they actually lost, and that makes up $37,000 plus of what they're seeking, and there is just flat out no right to recover that against my client. In order to recover those fees in our system, you have to be the prevailing party, which the city was not. Similarly, Mr. Vargas did not own the property and was not a party to the $21,000 plus in fees that the city is seeking to have the receiver appointed in the first place when Mr. Andamo owned the property. As Mr. Vargas was not involved in that, they simply are not accessible against him. Throughout this entire process, Mr. Vargas has been more than willing to reimburse the city for some portion of that, and I've tried to engage in negotiations to do that, and he's still interested in pursuing that. We just haven't been able to get much of a response or success in negotiations with the city. Again, I hope you all had a chance to look at and read what I provided. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Thank you very much. Council members, did you have any questions?
I would suggest that we go ahead and allow the legal counsel that's representing the Community Development Department on their decision here.
Thank you very much, please.
Amanda?
Yes. This is Amanda Jones. I am an attorney with Silver and Wright, and I've been working on this matter for the last year. So I just want to address briefly a couple of the points that were raised by Mr. Vargas's counsel. On the issue of the fees that were incurred prior to Mr. Vargas's purchase of the property, there is a provision in the Health and Safety Code that allows the city to recover its fees and costs against the owner of the property, which includes anybody who purchases the property with actual or constructive notice of the city's nuisance abatement action. And when Mr. Vargas purchased the property, there was a notice of pendency of nuisance abatement action on title to the property, which explained that the city would be seeking to recover its fees and costs, and then it may also do so by way of a special assessment. It was up to Mr. Vargas to determine if he wanted to purchase the property, but that was on title to the property. And then after the purchase, there were different motions that were filed to try and get a receiver reappointed, but that was due in large part to Mr. Vargas's failure to rehabilitate the property in a timely manner. And I don't really want to get into a big debate over who was responsible for what, but I do want to raise the point that the city does not need to be the prevailing party in order to recover those fees and costs, because there is a provision in the Health and Safety Code that allows the city to recover its reasonable fees and costs regardless of whether it's the prevailing party. Once the property is found to be substantially dangerous, which this property was when the receiver was originally appointed back in 2016. So it's our position that we are entitled to recover all the fees and costs. We have requested that they be added as a special assessment against the property. And I'll take any questions or any clarification you might need on these points.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring it back to council members. Do you have any questions?
I do, Mayor. This is
Thank you,
Councilman Stowe.
Thank you.
Does Mr. Vargas plan on living in this house? Is it going to be a rental? Is he going to resell it? Or do you know, or does anyone know?
Councilmember Stowe is requesting if Mr. Vargas plans to live in the home.
He plans to either rent it or sell it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question or clarification that I need. So at the time that Mr. Vargas purchased the property, he was aware that the property was, that there was going to be some recovery costs that he would need to pay. And so that was already out front for him to know. Am I correct? That was already disclosed.
Yeah, were you able to hear Councilmember
Yes.
Corolla?
A little bit. I think she was inquiring as to whether Mr. Vargas knew about the abatement notice that was recorded against the property when he purchased it, and that he may be responsible for abating the nuisance. Is that what the question was?
Yes.
Okay. I will not argue that the notice wasn't recorded against the property, which may have given or under the law provided Mr. Vargas with constructive knowledge of it. He claims to have not known what that meant and still doesn't have a great idea about what that notice meant. My argument with regard to that is, okay, he probably had constructive notice of that, the abatement notice on the property. However, he had no idea and was provided no idea what amount of money or responsibility that the city was going to later assess against the property. And again, I think at the time that he purchased the property, the city's fees and costs related to the property were somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000. Again, from that point forward, the vast majority of the fees that the city is now seeking were were related to a motion which it did lose. And I disagree respectfully with Mrs. Jones's position, or Ms. Jones's position, with regard to the ability for a non-prevailing party to recover fees. I think that is just simply not the law.
Thank you.
Councilmember Peñalosa, did you have a question?
No, Councilwoman Gorilla asked the question that I had in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor, did you have a question?
I just want to clarify for the attorney, for Mr. Vargas, that that he intended to sell or rent the property for profit, but did not calculate what was owed on it in order to do so.
Did you hear
Was
Councilmember Reyes' question?
Was the question whether, when he bought it, did he intend to sell or rent it, and did he know the amount of, or I guess, what amount the city was going to claim it is owed on the property? Is that the question?
Just in the process of, because we're here now, the process of calculation that arrived us to this point, it looks like they were documented, so I just want to understand that he set out to profit, yet didn't calculate what it would take to do so.
Well, he couldn't calculate it. It was not, the amount that the city claims it is or was owed was not in the notice itself. And in fact, he didn't even know what that number was until he was named in the reappointment of the receiver lawsuit. And from that point, I tried to get the special counsel to tell me what it was, and it was incredibly difficult for me to get any response from special counsel as to what made up the money they were looking for.
And at that point, sorry, this is Vice Mayor Reyes again, and at that point, nobody, the thought process wasn't that the amount was going to go up.
No, and in fact, I tried to negotiate with the city to pay that amount that was currently owed in payments or through the sale of the property, to no success.
That raised my eyebrows. Okay, could you repeat that?
Does Amanda want to respond to that?
Okay, okay.
Sure. Yeah, I would be happy to. It was that my understanding is that it was before I was involved in the case, but my understanding in talking to the attorney who previously handled it is that the direction was to get full payment of the fees and costs, and that there wasn't a negotiation room on that. And I'm not aware of any detailed conversations that took place on a payment plan or anything else.
To what was just mentioned now.
Okay.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Yes, please, Councilmember Peñalosa.
So I'm not familiar with these type of cases, but I guess I don't know who would be able to answer this. Who would is there a reason why whenever the attorney for Mr. Vargas, whenever he was trying to get information in regards to how much they would have to pay, is it pretty common for that number to not be given to, if they're trying to get that information, or was it because the city yet didn't know what that total cost was going to be? I'm curious to get information on that.
Yes, so I believe that it's because the number was provided, but the billing records are attorney-client privileged, and we could not turn those over. So a breakdown, specifically line by line, which has been provided in advance of this hearing to opposing counsel so that they could adequately defend themselves against this hearing. We did provide a detailed declaration, but again, because they're subject to the attorney-client privilege, we can't produce them without a city council waiver. So they did have the number. I think they wanted to know what went into the number, but they were part of the case as well, and so I think it was fairly obvious what made up that amount.
Just one point of clarification, though. Prior to or at the purchase of the property, Mr. Vargas was not provided with any information as to the amount claimed to be owed or owed on that property. Only after, when he was served with the reappointment of the receiver lawsuit.
Before he bought the property, did he ask? Was there efforts made to find out what that is?
I did not hear that question.
Prior to the purchase, were there efforts to find out what the cost amount was
By Mr. Vargas?
by Mr. Vargas?
I do not believe so.
And I'll just point out that the property was purchased from the court receiver. So the property was in active litigation, and it was purchased as a result at sort of like an insignificant amount compared to what it is now likely going to be sold for. After the rebate that was given to Mr. Vargas, his purchase price was $26,500.01. And I just went on to Zillow, and it's showing that the property is valued at fully rehabilitated, which it has been now, at $246,600. So there's
Thanks to Mr. Vargas's efforts.
Understood, but he also got the property at a discount because it was in active litigation.
And it was burned.
And because it ended, and it had the notice of pendency on it as well.
So I have a couple of questions.
Please.
This is Virginia Guerrero. So the property was sold at a reduced amount. Mr. Vargas purchased that property, even though there was a claim on it that the city was, going to get reimbursed. He didn't meet with anyone, contact the city to find out what that cost was at that time. So I believe I heard somebody say it was $30,000 at that time, but now that it's come up to $76,000. So my question is, if we were to reduce that amount, because this isn't our money, it's community's money, taxpayers' money. So wouldn't that be a gift to public funds?
That's correct.
So if we reduced it from the $76,000, then we are actually giving away public funds.
Here's what I would recommend, Councilmember Garola, is that the council can decide here what costs it wants to go ahead and approve for, as part of this process as to what it wants to try to recover. We can, obviously, and if there's also a lawsuit that is currently pending by this property owner against the city. So we can still negotiate and under those circumstances and potentially come to some sort of resolution, but that can be done separate and apart from what's being done tonight. And that's probably the better way to do it so we don't have a gift of public funds issue, quite frankly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor, I have one more question.
Please. Please.
Kind of lost my train of thought here. Is there a list of potential fees that was listed prior to Mr. Vargas taking over the property? Even though we didn't have the numbers, but was there a list of potential fees that could possibly be applied to this property?
I don't know that Amanda could understand.
I don't think.
I didn't
I had a-
understand his.
I did not hear that.
understand his question. I'm sorry.
I didn't hear it either. I apologize.
It's okay. Again,
No.
You're looking, Bill, are you looking for a list of a breakdown of the fees? Is that what you're asking about?
not a breakdown. I know that we didn't have a breakdown, but a list of potential fees that could be applied to the property. Like,
As far as-
the attorney's fee without the number in there, or, the city's hookup fees, or whatever the case may be. Was there a list?
Well, I think we know that we know what the fees are versus the direct costs from the city, correct? Do we?
But did he know the potential, cost of each, could be a fee charge each item? Was there a list for each item that it could be a potential cost for?
So if I may, member of council, it's kind of a follow-up to the question of which it's not believed that Mr. Vargas asked what those costs were. I think it's the follow-up where, was there actually a list with the costs enumerated? Is that a fair
Correct. That's
restating?
fair
So I guess that's the question. At the time of Mr. Vargas's purchase, was there itemized calculation of costs?
Did you hear that question, Amanda?
Yes, I did. So the property was sold at auction, and Mr. Vargas was the highest bidder. So there wasn't a back and forth discussion. There was no, as far as I understand it, there was no attempt to contact the city, no request at that time to ask what the fees were and costs were. And so there wasn't an opportunity to provide that prior to his purchase because it was never asked for.
But I guess for clarification, Ms. Jones, is there an itemization from that date?
Oh, from that date, let's see, I can, in front of you, I would have to get back to you with that exact number. Let's see.
The objection
because
that
right now-
I provided to the council has a breakdown, my best estimate of a breakdown of that, of the question you're asking on page 5, and I've created a spreadsheet that tried the best I could to allocate those funds, not necessarily by a date, but by chronologically with regard to the lawsuits that were advanced by the city. It's certainly not perfect, and Ms. Jones can probably do a better job.
Yeah, if you want, I could even do it while we're on the phone here. It would take me about 5 minutes.
I'm going to chime in, and I'm going to come in with a different approach to this, because I understand the piece of property was purchased at auction and it was on a bid, simplistic. And in the past, I'm just talking buy-sell. I mean, when you have a property and it's a buy-sell escrow from a seller and buyer, and there is relevance to title search, and there's documentation that should have been on the piece of property that disclosed that this was there. Now, going from that, having worked for a title company and having been part of searches, knowing that it has to go back even to the date of recording. If something shows up and it holds up a closing of an escrow because something does show up, sometimes you have to request through the title company that amount where it's going to. So here I'm a little, I'm saying it was purchased, it was there, and in the negotiations, which I'm hearing this and this from two legal counsels, which I comprehend the both. I'm comprehending one more than the other, but it's having the formula and having all the paperwork and having all the filing systems put together. Now, when something is on a title search, it says a lien in the dollar amount, and it shows the person, it shows the name, and then if you're going to pay that, that's where the contact is made, and you get the dollar amount from the party of who filed it. So that's all been done. Please, I'm just asking for answers here. Was all of that done through this process for Mr. Vargas?
So Mayor, I think I can help you out with that.
Please.
So apparently, given this type, the process that this was under, because it was still ongoing.
Okay.
There was, and it's actually in the special counsel's response, it says the city had a notice of pendency of action. So we had a notice of pendency, and what that notice of pendency specified was all costs, all expenses, fees, including attorney's fees and receiver certificates of abating the nuisances on the subject property may become a personal liability of all owners and responsible parties and may become a first priority lien or special assessment against the subject property that will take priority over all other interests in the subject property. So that is the notice that he did have.
Then it's on there.
So it wasn't, what isn't there isn't a specific number because you don't have that finalized yet, is what at least is what I think is being articulated.
That's a piece I'm looking for, and it's on there and it's clearly stated. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the bottom line on this this is Councilmember Peñalosa is that unfortunately, I think, Mr. Vargas, obviously through the process of this, he purchased a home and at a very discounted price, through the bidding process and because it was going through litigation or whatever it may be. And he didn't anticipate the cost was going to be this high, and so it was stated in, thank you for the clarification and for Mayor for asking that question, because I think that's the question that we all have on our mind is that was there any piece of information that he would have made him known to him that there was going to be additional costs? And I think he just didn't, I don't think he anticipated it was going to be over $70,000. And so, it is what it is right now, unfortunately.
This is Councilwoman Guerrero, and I had a question again to clarify. So the first owner was, previous to Mr. Vargas was, who was it?
Andalmo.
Huh?
Andalmo.
Analmo. Okay, so those fees which my notes are, Mr. Slate noted on page 5, which I had seen, shows $21,679. So the new owner, Mr. Vargas, also assumes those fees as well?
That's correct under this process. That's at least
So
my understanding of the process.
At that time, then, he had already $58,000, almost $60,000 in fees. And then the city's cost of $7,900. I don't know what the other fees are that are unspecified, but so at that point, he was already, when he purchased that property, he was already under by $60,000 that he should have, if he would have looked, he may have gotten that answer that those are the costs you're gonna have to pay. I mean, because when I'm gonna buy a piece of property, I'm gonna look and see what I'm gonna have to pay, even if I'm gonna auction on it. So, anyway, that's just a question, or a statement I had.
Well, I can appreciate that, and I'm going to chime in because we started off with Ayala, and then it was quitclaim to Andamo. And my question would only be, was that quitclaim deed ever insured? It was one of these, and if it's not insured, it carries, if there's no insurance on a document when it's recorded, it comes with the attached, whatever's attached to the property. No ands, ifs, or buts.
Well, with a quitclaim, you're taking whatever
The
that
risk,
has.
you're taking the risk of assuming the rights, title, and interest with the things that are there. And that's sort of the process of, okay, now it's another person that's coming in. So, because that also caught my attention was to use the quitclaim deed as a release of obligation, so. Counsel?
I'm sorry, I heard the question.
I didn't hear the question.
No, the mayor was just asking if the council members had anything else to say.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I can't legal
I'm
counsel.
looking at the calculations that have been provided on page 5 without the unspecified, I don't know what that is. That's $67,128. I mean, those are the fees that have just accumulated. So, I think somebody said, eyes wide open.
I do, in case any council member needs it, I do have the number of the city's fees and costs at the time that Mr. Vargas purchased the property.
I would like to hear it.
Please.
Okay, so the attorney's fees and costs were $29,149.30. And what that doesn't include is staff costs and time, which we haven't been able, they weren't documented well enough to recover as well. So the just the straight attorney's fees and litigation costs at that point were just shy of $30,000, so $29,149.30.
Thank you.
So I heard that right, that those are just attorney fees and mitigation fees?
Yes, attorney fees and then litigation costs, that's correct.
For litigation.
Because at that point, we'd already had the receiver appointed, and we had gone through the litigation with the previous owner. So there was quite a bit of work that had gone into trying to get this property rehabilitated.
Does the city council have any other questions?
Any other questions from city council?
I don't.
I would like to ask a question in regards to, so the total amount that is, if we were to consider, the fact that maybe the attorney fees that, that the city incurred in attorney fees for the other person that we were, I guess, the litigation that we were going through, and like it would be up to council could decide to deduct that if just in case like we would decide that that Mr. Vargas wouldn't have to pay everything because like how would that even look like? Is that even possible? Or I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how that would work.
I'm sorry, Daniel, I didn't quite understand your question.
I guess, I think for me, one of the, I think what concerns me is just, I know that by law, the city is able to recover the attorney fees that, that we occurred, right? And
Correct.
And so my question would be, I don't know how this whole thing works, but can the city decide to opt out and be like, okay, those fees, we're gonna deduct those, and you would pay the fees that we incur to attorney fees and staff time that whenever it was during the time that Mr. Vargas made the purchase and moving forward from that. So I'm just wondering, it's possible for the city to do that? Like, I mean, we could technically deduct that if we decided on that, or not?
We do, Daniel. I think it's a good question. We have a couple options. We have several options. So, I mean, you could go ahead and approve tonight and then talk about it. But the one thing about doing that is, I guess, then we've got an amount that we've ordered that we have to try to figure out how to rectify. The other thing we could do is, if you want to continue this matter, pending discussions between the parties, we could do that as well to see if we can come to a resolution. And then you don't have to act on this quite yet. I know that there was a deadline. I don't know what that does to the lawsuit issue, because I know that there was an extension on our response to file to that lawsuit pending what happened, pending this hearing. But if we can work that out, and I guess we can ask Amanda about that, we could figure that out. So we can do that as well. So you can approve the full amount. You can go ahead and approve a lesser amount. I think that under our municipal code, and the statutes that have been cited, I think we can make a case for the whole thing if you want to. I mean, I know that there's this issue before or after and what, but I think that you can actually you could decide you're going to approve the full amount, but you can also decide you can approve a lesser amount. Or you can just, if you're thinking about that, I actually think it's probably better to go ahead and continue this thing, and we can actually have more discussion with the council. But I think we need to, my understanding is we had made an offer, and then there's a lot of distance between those offers, and obviously there's going to have to be some compromise on the owner's part if we're going to get anywhere on that, but we can talk as well. So that's an option.
Thank
So
you.
if we continue it, the attorney costs continue to increase, right?
Well, I mean, no, I don't think there shouldn't be any fees being collected, right? I think the fees the property's been rehabilitated. We're talking about the increase of, you're right, I mean, everybody's incurring attorney's fees on this right now, but we're going to anyways because there's an action open. They filed an action against you, a lawsuit against you. So, I mean, we can't totally eliminate that. However, the fees related to this proceeding are done, the costs are done because the property's been rehabilitated.
Okay.
At least that would be my understanding, and I guess Amanda can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that we're at the point now when you're rolling it over and talking about putting it on the tax roll, you've got a finite number. So that amount isn't going to change.
Okay. Right, that's correct. The fees and costs related to the nuisance abatement will be done, and the only thing will be if the new lawsuit proceeds, then whatever fees and costs the city incurs in defending against that.
Correct.
I would move that we continue it and see if you can negotiate a cost.
You can, what I would recommend we do here is we can close the hearing portion of this
that's
matter.
right. I'm sorry.
And continue deliberations, and you can continue council deliberations pending discussion with the property owners.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead.
No.
No.
I'd recommend not, we keep it to the administrative hearing.
It is 7:54, and we will go ahead and close the public hearing. And now we go into the recommendation. Councilmember Gurrola, you stated that we continue negotiation? That's in a motion, correct? Yes. Okay, so do we need to?
Did you hear the motion? Did both of you hear the motion?
I did not.
Was that Councilmember Peñalosa who second?
Yes.
Okay.
But they need it stated. So I think that the motion by Councilmember Gurrola was to continue the deliberations pending discussions between the parties.
Correct.
Thank you.
And we have the.
Right, that we bring that back by the next meeting to get this resolved?
Yeah.
Sure. In fact, since we continued, it would be continued to the next meeting. We can read that into the motion.
The only potential problem with that I see is that I can't, make any settlement offer without city council's approval. So I need, it's hard to do in a public hearing.
We
I need to have
actually-
some direction from city council.
That's okay, though. We can talk about it, and then we can schedule a meeting if needed.
We're going to have the need to schedule a special meeting for June 30th. So
Correct.
we will be having a meeting before July 7th.
Yeah, so we could put it on for then. That's a good idea. For closed session.
Okay, let's bring it back. We have a motion, we have a second. No further discussions. Please call for vote.
Councilmember Gurrola,
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa,
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Reyes,
Aye.
Mayor Flores.
Aye. Motion passes unanimous, 5-0. Thank you. We will now go into the next public hearing.
Thank you, Your Honor. Our second public hearing this evening is to consider annual adjustment of fees by application of the Engineering News Record Cost Index, and Mr. Sanchez will provide the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Lawless, Mayor, and City Council. So this item is for the annual adjustment of fees by application of the Engineering News Record Cost Index. In accordance with prior City Council authorization, staff calculates and adjusts all of the attached fees annually. The policy as of 2003 is to provide the council notice of all the proposed adjustments, whether they are subject to the Mitigation Fee Act or not, 60 days before the new fees become effective. Most of the fees in Exhibit H and Exhibit A were in effect before January 1st, 1989, which was the effective date of the Mitigation Fee Act, and has only been increased by the ENR 20 City Construction Cost Index. The city staff gives 60 days notice to the Building Industry Association for the fees covered by the Mitigation Fee Act, along with notice to local developers and engineering firms of the proposed impact fee increase. Due to the recently adopted pavement standards requiring the use of polymer modified asphalt, the residential development community has requested that council consider an adjustment to the transportation impact fee. A limited decrease, for example, 5% in the TIF is being sought for residential developments as polymer modified asphalt extends the life of pavement by an average of 5 years. However, also increases paving costs. The use of polymer modified asphalt helps defer maintenance efforts to allow the city to focus its efforts on other pavement rehabilitation projects where only conventional asphalt had been used. If approved, the new fees will take effect on July 15th, 2020. So the recommendation to City Council is that we conduct a public hearing and consider all public testimony and implement the ENR cost index automatic increase for fiscal year 2020/2021 at a 1.48% increase.
Thank you very much. It is 7:59. We will open up the public hearing. Do we have anything that has come in electronically? Anyone would like to see that there is no comment? It is 7:59, and we will close the public hearing. Council?
Yeah, I have a quick question, Your Honor.
Okay, Councilmember Peñalosa?
The question I have is, I'm not too sure so every year, I know from the staff report and what just was said, council is, we are provided with information whether this changes on an annual basis. When was the last time, last year, did we adjust this, the cost index, or, because I don't remember us having this discussion last year, but maybe I just, it's not in my memory, but did we increase it already last year? Or when was the last time we did?
It was adjusted last year.
Oh, it was? Okay.
You'll find in there's a kind of by minute order, there has been suspended years, going back to 2010 through 2013, the increases were suspended. In 2015, there was actually a kind of a makeup of that of 17%, which is then for the last 5 years, there has been the implementation of the ENR. It's essentially a cost of living index. What's the cost of construction going up, or at least associated with development cumulatively as a percentage, and obviously fairly flat this year at less than 2%.
Okay, thank you. And so, I mean, according to the staff report, the increase will help to ensure that we can provide maintenance for the new, the pavement rehabilitation, right, for what was before asphalt, now to using the polymer, the PMA.
Well, so the building association had requested that the council consider a modification of the transportation impact fee to account for the increased costs of the polymer asphalt requirement as part of the engineering standards. The transportation impact fee itself does not use a calculation of neighborhood streets. It is a calculation strictly of arterial and collector streets, and what a calculation is of a proportional cost of new developments impact to those arterials and collector streets. So there, in this, and Mr. Sanchez and Ms. Byers and myself were all part of I would say a dialogue with our local developers on this issue, because I think there was some confusion over what is actually in the TIF calculation. But the TIF calculation is not based upon, it's not based upon the neighborhood streets. That's not a part of the calculation. It is strictly, there's 35 streets that are identified as being arterials and collectors, and then what new developments impact is associated with those collectors and arterials. That being said, there was a candid conversation between staff and the development community of, and I think once that was understood that there's not a correlation, there is a correlation between what the city has as a standard, which is beyond, I would say, the regular standard for neighborhood street development, which has this additive to it, which has somewhere, I mean, the number, either 5 to 10 or 10 to 15%. And so what the development community was saying is that this is an additional cost beyond what would be the normal standard. Would the council consider some minor modification on the TIF side, even though it's not part of the calculation? The TIF still gets passed along to the home buyer. So this is both are going to get passed on, is essentially. So the question
Just an
then becomes,
adjustment to a different line item.
right. So basically, what for council to consider would be just in the single family residential RS1, RS2, instead of what's proposed here going from $13.67 to $13.87, $20 per unit increase would actually be 5% was a number that was thrown out there, because what the actual cost per unit is going to be is very difficult. Like I said, it's a 5 to 10 up to 15% difference, and that's really just going to depend on what is going on at that particular time. It is more. I mean, there's no argument that it is. It's as to how much. So the question then becomes, do you actually look to reduce to compensate for this new standard that's been put in the neighborhood residential? Do you have a minor decrease? So like I said, 5% was a number. There's not been a different one submitted by the development community. So it's really just a question, do you wish to offset this increased standard that's happened in the residential requirement to have a compensating decrease, so to speak, in the TIF? The TIF itself from, and this was a kind of a question of clarification of the development community, it was kind of an interesting, their assumption was that this was a significant part of the city's arterial collector maintenance effort, which is not the case. This does not generate, and I said, if you really wanted it to be one of consequence, you would be quadrupling, 4 or 5 magnitudes what this cost is. So, so as an example, a 5% reduction would be $68 per house. So it's just really, does the council wish to consider, because of the enhanced standard in the neighborhood residential, which will provide, is more expensive, but also presents a longer lasting product, 5 to 10 years, to have, because that cost is going to get passed on to the home buyer, to have an offset to that on its arterial collector.
So it's just an exchange. We're going to get the polymer on the streets. We're going to give them 5% decrease in the TIF, and we're all sort of happy, medium.
Well, again, that was a discussion. There's not been any comments received this evening. I said I would represent the conversation. I will tell you there was an epiphany through that conversation, that there was a gentleman that would usually come and speak to you, and I would say brought a lot of years of experience, and I would say it was a fairly represented the circumstances, and that was Mr. Jim Winton. And he would typically be here to talk about this. He himself, I would say, was supportive of the polymer asphalt conversation, but I think what his comments would be is just as I've just represented them, which is you've got this thing that's going to have another cost center to a new home buyer. is there a way to compromise this to essentially be an offset? And in the end, it's a no-cost item to the home buyer, and you get 5 to 10 years out of the local road. That's essentially how I think Jim would just share what I just said. Is there a compromise that we can find specifically as it relates to the single-family residential? Again, we're not talking about what this means in the commercial or industrial areas. This is strictly a single-family residential conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning Mr. Whitten. I surely do miss him coming up to the podium and providing that insight. So it's a good remembrance. So this is just the public hearing part, right?
Right, we need to open the public hearing still, right?
Oh, what we did.
Do we have it?
No, we opened.
Do we already have it?
Yeah, we didn't.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't receive any comments.
We opened and closed it.
Yeah, so we're in.
That's what I thought. So I move that we approve this item since the public hearing has already been conducted.
We have a motion by Councilmember Gurrola,
And
I'll second.
and we have,
Sorry, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Okay, and I'll second it.
and we have a second by Vice Mayor Reyes. There'll be no further
And
discussion.
just one comment that I would thank Mr. Shelton for taking me to Mr. Whitten's office when I first got appointed to council and have a discussion on these things, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, and I knew Mr. Whitten from working for the title company years ago. Exactly. I've been there. All right, we have a motion, we have a
Just for
second.
clarification, the
Mayor,
motion
Mayor,
is,
I need some clarification on this
Okay,
motion.
please.
yeah, what was the motion was to approve the 1.48%, but with a 5% reduction to TIF?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Stowe.
She just answered it.
Okay, thank you. Now,
So that also is implementing the ENR cost index, right?
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
Something
Yep.
that- Okay.
all right.
Can I make it that's an important clarification. So at what point does the 5%, is it after the ENR application or before the ENR
Oh,
application?
what was your intention?
Before the ENR. It was, instead of the increase, actually a 5%.
So there will be a 5% decrease to the current,
Right, so the 1367 will actually be about 1,300. And so it will show it reflected going down, and it will make sure in the minute order, as it's tracked here, that was done and the specific reason why.
so everything goes up 1.48 except for the TIF, which goes down 5%.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification. And now we've had quite a bit of discussion, and we've had the motion, we have the second. Please call for vote.
Councilmember Gurrola,
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa,
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Reyes,
Aye.
Mayor Flores.
Aye, passes unanimous, 5-0. Thank you so much. We will now go into the next item.
Thank you, Your Honor. We had scheduled for this evening a public hearing to consider the adoption of the fiscal year 2020-21 budget. Unfortunately, we've had a noticing issue between the Porterville Recorder when this had been scheduled to provide the required 10-day notice, which had attempted to be made, but actually ended up being noticed for only 8 days. So unfortunately, we're unable to, because the 10-day noticing didn't literally happen, it was actually only 8 days, that we need to schedule this consideration, and actually the scheduling of a special meeting for Tuesday, June 30th. Actually, it kind of leads that, to actually make that noticing now is to fall in line with June 30th, Tuesday, June 30th. So the recommendation of staff would be, and as it's been presented to you, that we schedule a special meeting for Tuesday, June 30th, specifically to consider adoption of the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget with that that proper noticing, that will, the necessary 10-day noticing of that public hearing, and so that the budget can be adopted on the 30th.
Okay, so we will continue, we will have it on.
That's a specific action that staff, there would, as an underlying component of this, as it's addressed in the staff report, is request by staff for council to consider a deferment or deferral of the business license fees for what are referred to as your Tier 1 and Tier 2 business licenses. These are your, they're a $25 every 6 months. Your business license operates on a bi-annual basis, twice a year. Biannual, right? Yeah, twice a year.
Semi-annual.
Or semi-annual. For July and January. So the July is coming up. As you're aware, through COVID, we've had a number of businesses that actually, to this day, are not open, which the council may wish to consider, and some of those being some of those that you would be asking for a business license that currently aren't authorized to operate. So something for the council to consider. We have 1,300 business licenses that fall in this small business category. This is generally your sole proprietorships and things of that nature. So the request of staff would be for the council to consider a deferral to January 1. So instead of 25 being due in July, and then that $25 would be moved to January. So for discussion of the council come, I would say, December, to look at the, I think the message to send to them would be that we still want to do business license renewal for these tiers 1s and 2s. However, that cost is deferred until January 1, which certainly the council can consider as part of its budgetary. So we're not waiving it, but we're deferring it, and the council can consider that as part of its budget deliberations proposed to occur by October 1st. The cumulative cost to that is $32,000 for that. That's $32,000 that instead of being collected in July would be moved, essentially because the entire package is $64,000 for the year. That's the general collection. Is that accurate, Ms. Bemis?
So would you need this direction this?
That I would, so that as
Right,
we're
okay.
preparing, we are preparing to send out business license renewals, that we can do that and indicate that there is, if it's council's desire, that be deferred until January.
What's the possibility of waiving that in the first half of those fees?
We can certainly consider that as part of the budgetary adoption process. I'll defer to the city attorney. They could take that action to do
what?
you could certainly take that action if you would like, to waive the fee altogether.
Will it, tear up our budget, or is it something we're counting on, or if we?
It's 32,000.
Yeah, that's for the year, but how about the first half? That's what
No,
I'm saying.
that is correct. The first half is 32,000.
Oh, the first half, okay.
But we can't take action on that tonight, can we?
No, you can put it, that's a good point. But you can put it on, we could just put it on for a consent calendar item where you just, on a consent calendar, you waive collection of the fee.
I have a question. What do we do when somebody wants to start a new business? Do they get a waiver until next, or do they have to pay? Because I would think that if they have the ability to pay and they wanted to start a new business, that they wouldn't get the waiver. But I don't know how we would work through that.
Yeah, I mean, because you're talking about waiving regardless if they're open, regardless if they are open or not? Is that what we're talking about?
I was recommending just a
Deferment.
deferral.
Just a
So-
deferment.
So that the collection
Yeah.
wouldn't occur for 6 months.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean,
This is a common
deferment.
action
the
that
legal
cities are taking.
counsel always favors deferrals over waivers
Deferments.
anyways. This is a special circumstance because you do have businesses that actually have not been in business. So I think where I would normally say absolutely no waiver, you could maybe make an argument for it, but I think deferral, especially given that
Deferral.
it's not that much, it's not a substantial amount of money. This is not going to be the main cost concern for the
No.
businesses.
I think deferral is good, and
So-
I think also, it gives a nice focused attempt to update officers, things that you're selling, emergency contacts through that process. But I think we need to think about what new businesses would be subjected to in that.
Okay, so I think tonight we just probably need to focus on the deferral of the license fees for Tier 1 and 2. And.
Yeah. Oh, can I add a comment, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the efforts of Councilmember Stowe to think about waiving. I know that our businesses have taken a drastic hit due to COVID-19, but I think that it makes sense for us to move forward with deferral until January, and so I would like to make a motion to defer payments for the businesses' license fees until then.
For tiers 1 and 2.
That's correct.
Okay, because we need to get that in there. So we have a motion. And-
So we can't take action on it?
We don't actually have this on for a
No.
Well, it was going to
The
be part of the,
direction.
We can opt to omit it from the budget. Is it part of the?
And it's also a public hearing item.
Well, it's the public, so we have to have a public hearing on the budget before you guys adopt it. Doesn't
Right.
mean that you can't talk about the budget tonight.
Right.
So everybody understands. So you guys actually can continue, you can have a discussion concerning the
Okay,
budget.
then.
and here's what I would say, by a deferral, you're not changing the budget. That is actually in the budget as a budgeted revenue. You're just deferring its collection
Why
time.
don't we do this? Let's defer any, you can approve that on the next meeting's consent calendar, right?
Right.
And
That-
we've got, the administration has the clear intention of the council. They understand they're not going to start collection efforts or on those fees. And then you guys
Okay.
can formally approve it at the next meeting.
All right. That answers all the questions right there, and at least you have the direction, and you know it's going to happen. And then we're going to have the special meeting on the 30th, so it'll be on the consent.
Yeah, just to make sure that we are consistent with the city charter that requires that public hearing and that,
Right.
I mean, it's really making
Correct.
sure that your charter is followed.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
And again, apologies for the noticing differential of not having the appropriate 10 days.
Thank you so much. Okay, who needs a 10-minute break? Anybody?
Let's
Okay,
do it. Let's go.
pardon me?
Oh, sorry, man. I meant let's keep on going with the show. Let's go.
That's why I'm asking, that's why I'm asking.
All right.
Okay, now we'll go on to scheduled matters.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have 6 scheduled matters before the council this evening. The first is to consider the scheduled water rate increase, and Mr. Knight's going to provide that staff report electronically.
Thank you, Mr. Lawless, Mayor, members of the council. Tonight's intent for the scheduled matter is to discuss council's decision and public hearing back July 19th, 2016, where we conducted a public hearing to consider the adoption of increases for water rates for water services in the city of Porterville. At that time, council considered the proposed rate increase and fixed rate of 2.3% automatic rate increase over the next 5 years. The effort tonight is to discuss the automatic rate increase that is proposed to take place July 1st, which would be 2.3%, and give council the opportunity to discuss and give staff direction as to, given the economic and social impacts of COVID-19 and the discussion of Governor Newsom's executive order in 4220, which suspended the authority for urban water suppliers to discontinue service for non-payment. Although this is not contained in the council, in the executive order, council has taken additional action to temporarily suspend imposition of late fees for non-payment. Given council's voluntary action, I felt that it was necessary for staff to bring this to council to discuss the opportunity of deferring this year's automatic rate increase. In the staff report, I proposed a number of options for deferral and consideration with dates range from October 1st through July 1st, 2021, to give the impacts ranging from minimum amount would be $83,000 to $275,000 should council decide to defer the full fiscal year. The estimated impacts are a little kind of a moving target, fluctuates a little bit depending on sales and the number of connections connected to the city service. As a result of this fee, it's important to note that it can fluctuate just a little bit higher depending on consumption through the year, but the staff's best estimate right now is $275,000 for the ultimate impact for an annual year of deferral. I just want to make council aware of the impacts of the deferral of this rate increase and get direction from council as to move forward. Available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Knight? Or Mr.
So the deferral doesn't impact the water system or your needs or the needs of the city for water?
Currently, it doesn't impose a huge impact as it relates to being able to continue to operate. But knowing that capital improvement projects and the city's direction path moving forward, it's still important to continue that fee in place for operation. But right now, we do have the flexibility to give that a consideration.
Thank you.
And if I may, Councilmember Grohl, Mr. Knight raises a great point, which is it doesn't have an operational impact, but as there's a later item on this agenda which talks about, and I would suggest that the council would be considering, if it does consider doing bonding for capital projects as I think is going to be a course of action in the current marketplace. There is capacity, and this comes to the difference between not imposing something, because that $275,000, as an example, could have bonding capacity of $4 to $5 million, just to show you the long-term effect of the money. So it's not an and I do believe, because I know that this comes up, and this will probably be a disclosure in bond documents, and you most recently looked at this with sewer as an example. So we did a sewer bond, which talked about that you hadn't raised your rates in a number of years, and you're doing a feasibility study or looking at a rate study right now. What are the revenues and how those are considered. By deferring it, I don't think it will have a corresponding affect that, because I think that can be shown as that there is a rate increase that has been approved. It would just be a disclosure in that. So I think Mr. Knight made a good point. It doesn't have an operational, it doesn't have necessarily an operational sense now. It has a potential impact for capital projects, which I think can be mitigated, but I think it is a great question to, just to ensure that it doesn't affect your long-term ability for bonding.
And that was going to be my follow-up, because, we're looking at tertiary treatment plant, and, on the staff report, it says, could have a minor impact on the bond financing capacity. And so, but we would still have the rate increase. We're just deferring it for a short period of time.
Right, for the time period defined by council.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I just wanted to bring up, I remember when we were talking about these rate increases, and it was partly the state wasn't going to loan money because we weren't making enough money off of it. From water, they thought we weren't going to be sustainable because we were charging the least that there was around, and the scheduled increases came after a lot of thought into what the community could manage to afford. So we put those two things next to each other, the state's mandate that we raise it and what the community can afford. The state's actions right now are both of those two things. I don't know that, it's not a bad thing to talk about doing this, and if operationally it's not going to affect us, and in the end, I think it's a thoughtful thing to do.
Yeah, and I appreciate Mr. Knight's sensitivity here, because you got, first of all, for the record, the city has been one of the more generous in that, and not going beyond the governor's order and not imposing late fees on its, and that is having a corresponding effect of $10,000 to $15,000 a month. So So for every month that late fees are not being assessed, that's a $10,000 to $15,000 impact, which is by comparison half of what we're talking about in this increase. So it's what I would say for the record is that the city, I will tell you, as an example, City of Tulare is not. They are charging late fees because they are following just the governor's order for not doing shutoffs, but they are imposing late fees as part of that. I believe Cal Water is doing the same. So the actions of the council have been more generous than, I would say, of the purveyors that I'm familiar with, has been the most generous. It was just a matter, and I appreciate Mr. Knight's sensitivity, given that action, that there is, and maybe it's more disclosure than anything else, that there is an increase coming. It's not a significant one. The average impact to the average customer, I think, is $1, less than $1.50 a month, $1.29 per month is what the calculation shows based on the average water user. But it was something that we didn't want to just have happen, and that the council didn't duly consider it.
I wish to say thank you for that sensitivity because it was brought to the table, and I can understand. And since we're not charging late fees for the payment, has that been successful that people are paying? And
Yeah, I'll let Ms. Bemis kind of, what would you say is that generally the behavior that folks are paying?
that's good. That's good. And through all of this, that the efforts were there, and that with the waiver of the late fees, that okay.
I just didn't want to, and I appreciate, I give the credit to Mr., blame. I don't want to blame him. I want to thank him actually for he said, we have this coming and we should probably have council deliberate. I mean, it's not significant, and the vice mayor raises a great point because there is going to be state assistance that we are going to be, I do imagine, seeking in, that's why I would never recommend not imposing it. In fact, we probably need to begin to have the conversation, given this is the last year of what those succeed. Just like with the ENR index, which is an every year thing, talking about, I will tell you that since you did your water rate increase, other agencies have increased. So actually, the deck is reshuffled, and you're probably, I would say, I don't know, Mr. Knight, you have a better pulse on this than I do, but I would say we're probably below the 50% again. Is that fair?
Yeah, and definitely too, I just, part of the deferral, we are still skirting the line there of so the term was at 1.5% of the median household income. The conversation during the consolidation discussions with the state, this topic has been had numerous times. So we're right there at that threshold of the 1.5%. So that was my direction for the deferral versus waiving the implementation, because it would definitely have negative impacts towards further projects with the state and the efforts in which we tried to accomplish through this whole process to be able to fund the improvements budgetarily.
Thank you. Councilmember Stowe, did you have any questions?
Yes, Mayor. I don't know, just a bit of history. Last time that we started deferring and waiving the water fees, they were a long time coming before we started increasing them again, and we got in trouble for doing that. We couldn't, the infrastructure was bad, we couldn't repair it because we didn't have the funding. So I just rather just charge and not defer and just keep on going with, where we have it, so we'll have money to further repair for infrastructure in the future.
Thank you. Okay, let's bring it to council, and your recommendation?
I understand what Councilmember Stowe is saying, but I believe here we have a set date. So I'm going to say or motion that we defer to October 1st of 2020 to allow people some time to get over the current situation of the COVID.
Thank you very much for that, because I was looking at both. I was listening to what Councilmember Stowe had said, and I would have to concur with the October 1st, 2020 date.
Yeah, I have one more question
Please.
to Mr. Knight, if I may. Is there any calculations on how much it will cost per household if we increased it now in July? Is it per household, just an average?
So the overall impact is going to be on an average household, $1.29 per month. And the increase goes up from the current rate of $1.87. I'm sorry, I don't have the attachment pulled up right in front of me. Just a second. $1.80, it'll go up from $1.87 per 100 cubic feet to $1.91. So it goes up 4 cents per 100 cubic feet, which equals to 750 gallons.
Councilmember Peñalosa, do you have a question?
No questions, Your Honor.
Vice Mayor, do you have any comment?
No, just that October, of course, water usage is going to be high now that people are home and it's warm, but October seems reasonable.
Okay.
And if I can add a comment, that might be a good subject, given Councilmember Stowe's comments, be a good subject matter for the budget adoption, talking about just, given that this is the final year, I think it would be good as part of that budget that we look at, have Mr. Knight look at where the city is comparatively come October 1, and so that, as we're coming into the final, this is the fifth of the 5 years, where are we at, so you can look at where, like I said, that I know that the cards have reshuffled and other agencies have done increases, and I think October 1 would give us a good time at the budget adoption period to evaluate where we're at.
Thank you very much. Okay, so do we have a recommendation?
I had made a motion.
Who made a
in second.
motion?
I think
Virginia made it.
Virginia did.
I second it.
Oh, you did? When did you second it?
But he said October 1 was good. He gave the thumbs up.
But I did now, if I didn't.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second.
I thought we were in discussion, I apologize.
Oh, no, okay. Now, be no further discussion. Let's call for vote, please.
Councilmember Gorilla,
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa,
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe,
No.
Vice Mayor Reyes,
Aye.
Mayor Flores.
Aye. Passes 4-1, thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next scheduled matter in order is the consideration of calling November 3rd, 2020 general election, requesting consolidation of election and setting specified services, and Ms. Hildreth will provide the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Lawless, Mayor, members of council. As the council is aware, the city's next general election is set to take place on November 3rd, with the candidate nomination period beginning July 13th. 3 districts have representatives with terms expiring in 2020. Those are Mayor Flores in District 3, Vice Mayor Reyes in District 4, and Councilmember Gorilla in District 5. And it is now time for the council to make certain determinations for the election protocols. There's 3 areas in question. One is the consolidation itself, if you choose to have county services to be utilized in that regard. And then it also has to do with the candidate statements, whether they are to be allowed, if they are to be allowed, who will pay for them. And lastly, if the mailings, if you're going to allow other mailings in addition to the candidate statements. And then lastly, the designation of the central counting of ballots, which is if you If you do consolidate, is typically the county elections office in Visalia. So back to the consolidation question, the city has consolidated its elections with the county for the past 17 years. Prior to 2003, the city conducted standalone elections with the assistance of guidance from election consulting firm Martin Chapman. They have since gone out of business. While the agreement for election services with the county has historically provided for shared responsibilities, which we are unique in that regard, it is proposed for this election that if the city chooses to consolidate, that the standard arrangement be pursued. The city's hybrid model consists of city staff handling all the candidate paperwork and the publication of all election-related notices, and these tasks were typically handled by the county and all other jurisdictions. And when we initially implemented this city's hybrid model, if you will, it was negotiated primarily due to the city's geographic location being some distance from the Register of Voters' offices. And this was in an effort to provide convenience for local candidates interested in running for office. And it really did prove to be effective. City staff was able to directly connect with the Register of Voters database, which allowed us the ability to check signatures, to verify that they were indeed registered voters. And so that it really did provide an efficient process. Unfortunately, the last two elections, we were not able to do that. We are no longer able to connect to that database. And so now it's really not effective at all. What we do now is we provide candidate paperwork and we accept it for them. However, we just fax it over to the county, and we really are serving more of now as a middle person. And so it just really kind of creates delays, and particularly if there's issues with the paperwork. So we are really wanting to get away from that process. Additionally, I think the time is ripe now for a change. Because due to the COVID pandemic, the county is now moving toward a more streamlined process by which they will allow for the acceptance of paperwork. You can actually obtain the paperwork online, and it would require really only one visit to the county, and that would be when you are submitting your paperwork to qualify as a candidate. They will be doing that by appointment only, so it would be really one trip to the Register of Voters office. So we think that the time is now to move to a more streamlined process in that regard. So that is with consolidation. As I said, the candidate statements, the decision that we really need to have made tonight is whether you will allow them, and if you do allow them, who will pay. So the last couple elections, the council chose to have the candidate pay for those statements. And now that we're in districts, we actually have different estimated costs for the printing of those candidate statements. And it was provided in the staff report, briefly, District 3 with 3,961 voters. The estimate is $1,000 for a candidate statement. District 4 has currently 5,664 voters. That estimate is $1,200. And then District 5 currently has 3,347 voters, and that estimate is $1,000. So also, if you're going to permit other materials to be mailed, we typically have, the council has not authorized that in the past. And then lastly, again, the designation of the central counting of ballots being the Tulare County Elections Office on South Mooney. So with that, staff is requesting that the City Council adopt the draft resolution calling the election for November 3rd, 2020, requesting and consenting to the consolidation of the election and setting specifications of the election order. 2, adopt the draft resolution requesting that the Board of Supervisors permit the Registrar of Voters to render specific services to the city for the November 3rd, 2020 election. 3, allow candidate statements of 20 words or less with no additional mailings and determine whether the candidate or the city shall be responsible for the estimated cost per candidate. 4, authorize that the County Elections Department at 5951 South Mooney Boulevard in Visalia, California, be designated as the central county place for the November 3rd, 2020 general municipal election. And lastly, 5, authorize payment to the County Register of Voters upon the completion of the requested services. Staff, I failed to mention, is estimating that the election will cost roughly $50,000. Based on the number of registered voters currently in Porterville, which is 21,693. Thank you, that's all staff has.
Thank you very much. A lot has changed, and I have been personally involved with the process in Visalia for other campaigns, and it's Grand Central Station when you pull out the paperwork. That back then it was still physically going in and filing the paperwork and being checked. So if it's the online process, having to go one time, it makes it a lot easier instead of going every time you have to file a paperwork to meet the deadlines. And if you don't have it right the first time, you have to go back the next day. So that, there's been a lot of change, which is good.
I'm only saying this to encourage more people to run, but if somebody runs unopposed, does that amount go down? I think one time Cam ran unopposed, so I don't remember if the number that you spoke of, if that's counted, because I don't even think he was on.
The cost of the election, total
Yes.
cost? Yeah, it would likely go down, yeah,
Okay.
because there would likely be an appointment in lieu made. Right.
Less printing costs.
Less printing,
Less
exactly.
work they have to do
Okay.
on the
Yep.
ballot.
Well, as I'm looking, and I'm going to take sort of a lead here because as I'm looking at, I believe that the candidate statement is the responsibility of the candidate. That is just something that if a candidate chooses to run, the dollar amount is something that the candidate should pay for, and that's just my opinion.
I agree with that. I also agree that it should be optional. It shouldn't be required. I think that some people may have other methods of getting their voice across or their vibe across rather than that, but it should definitely not be paid for by the city.
And that's correct, because when you do pull out the paperwork, that is an option that's already on there at that, when they give you, because the candidate statement, you can or you can't, and they tell you that. If you submit one, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine as well.
And the $1,000 or the $1,200 estimates, depending on which district you're in, that is purely an estimate, and what they do is they reconcile it at the end, and then
You get a reimbursement.
correct, or you get charged for whatever they reconcile it.
Council members, did you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, so.
Okay, Councilmember Peñalosa?
No questions, just a comment, that I would just say that this, I think, I'm gonna be in favor of this, just to make sure that we can ensure that our staff, if they are feeling like, if they are the middleman for this and they're not being given the same ability as in the past, it just makes sense for us to have the county take up this service and for us to pay them, so.
Councilmember Stowe?
No, I don't have any questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Well, if there are no other questions, no other discussion,
I would move for approval of the staff's recommendations with number 3, that the candidate pay, if they choose to have a statement.
I will second Councilwoman Guerrero's motion.
okay, we have a motion and we have a second with a change to number 3, that it's the responsibility of the candidate and an option, and that the city shall not be responsible. And is it now that there should be an appropriation of the $50,000?
Yeah, that would be, given that this is a unique, specific to this, that there be, council give that direction and the appropriation of $50,000 as an estimate with with the reconciliation in February when the bill is actually received. And this would be just for this, we have a successor item coming up, which actually may affect that, but for this particular, just for these three,
Okay,
just for this particular ballot would be 50,000 as the appropriated estimate.
Councilmember Gurrola, would you like to amend your motion to include that?
I don't think she heard you.
Councilmember Gurrola?
And on me, sorry.
Okay, would you like to amend?
Yes, I would amend it to include the $50,000.
All right, thank you so much, Councilmember Peñalosa, and you would be okay with the second, with the amendment?
Yes, that's correct, Your Honor.
All right, no further discussion, and we have the amendment to include the 50,000. Call for vote, please.
Councilmember Gurrola?
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Reyes?
Yes.
Mayor Flores?
Aye, passes unanimous, 5-0. Does anybody need a break? We keep going?
Keep going.
All right, we keep going.
Thank you,
I'm just asking.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next item in order is,
But he has an early time.
is kind of as a follow-up to that, given the upcoming general election, consideration of pursuing potential tax measures for the November 30th, 2020 election. I would say this is presented to council just as a matter of, there's been a number of discussions over the last couple of years, starting with cannabis, where the Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee had made some particular recommendations that in this election that the council consider actually 4 areas of taxation, which in our RFP process, we are deferring that should this be that there, we would have to evaluate that RFP process in light of the cannabis taxation. There has been, over the last year, some modifications in the state process. So there will be some diligence that's going to be required of staff to ensure that what's presented, should that be of interest to the council, that it is kind of the latest and greatest from a legal perspective. But in the past, we've had conversations about, and specifically in the Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee, was looking at small cultivation in two regards. One was what was considered small indoor, which had there's a delineation as a number of, if I remember correctly, what the canopy, if there's a factor of canopy, what the canopy area is of a grow area indoors. There's also what's called a nursery, which is you kind of seedlings to help other operations as they're continuing cultivation. There was distribution as well as testing were areas. And again, those were recommendations from the ad hoc committee for the council to consider. And so I guess remembering that conversation was there, do we want to continue to proceed with that? In addition to that, there's been other conversations involving perhaps the city's TOT rate, which I would say at its current rate is beneath the market standard of 10 to 12, which is, I would say, more. And you're going to see a lot of cities actually, given the losses that they've seen through this COVID, especially they're looking at TOT measures, enhancements, as well as sales tax measures. The city was ahead of that curve, I would say, with its passage of Measure I in the last election. So you're going to see a lot of measures come on this. I know here, even in Tulare County, there's a number of cities that are looking at sales tax measures, which I think the city attorney's involved in, at least one of them. So this is kind of an opportunity for the council over the next month. Do you want to look at additional measures for consideration for the November ballot? And I understand there are those, this will be a large response election because it does follow with the gubernatorial, is that not, no, it's governor. What do they call the presidential election?
Yeah.
So this will be a large turnout. That's typically, as you look at the trends, 18 isn't as much as 20 will be.
Yeah.
Council,
So we attached Wood Lakes as a sample ordinance on the cannabis. And I've also done a little bit of poking around just to see what the going rates are these days, because it has changed a little bit. But they do tend to run between 5 and 10%. Some go higher. Some are actually allow for a max of 15% of gross receipts on retail sales. The $25 per square foot, which is I think what they've got, that's what Wood Lake has done on other businesses, which, by the way, if we adopt this, it would not permit new ordinances until you adopt, or new businesses until, types of businesses until you adopt an ordinance that would permit those.
Okay.
But it's something to consider. Do you want to go ahead and potentially think about a tax rate on businesses we don't have yet, so that we don't have to go back and do it if you decide you want to permit those types of businesses? So it's just another layer. We don't have to do that right now. You could just stick to retail dispensary, and, which is what you guys have approved, and look at a taxation for that. But it's just something to consider if you want to go ahead and hit both. If you're going to proceed, you may want to consider broadening it.
And thank you for reminding me, I somehow left out retail when I was talking about
That's
that.
okay.
So I knew I
Yeah.
was missing one.
Okay.
It was the big one, which
Not a
is
problem.
retail.
Yeah. So, and so there's so many, and it really truly is just, what does a particular jurisdiction want to do? There are ones that start at, like, the first year, they start at a smaller amount, and then they incrementally raise it till it gets to a cap amount. There's just tons of different ways to approach how you want to implement a gross receipts excise tax. Or you can just start out the gate with 10%. I know that's what Wood Lake did. I don't know what they're actually charging. They've set all of them set maximums and then allow for the ability to set under that.
And they have decreased to 5%.
And I believe they did decrease to 5%, yeah. So, and they actually have a very, sort of explicit procedure for how they do that and what's required when they want to increase or decrease by more than 5%. So anyways, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, my guess was somewhere between 5 and 7 was probably the sweet spot.
The sweet spot. It seems to be, there's a lot at 6. I was just kind of eyeballing what, somebody did a sort of a chart of all the different cities and counties and what they're doing. So.
I mean, it's definitely good to have, as far as businesses we don't have yet, it's good to have something in there, because they can go in eyes wide open to what the expectation is.
Well, then we're not having to have this conversation,
Well,
in another 2 years when if you're deciding you want to expand what businesses
even the
you're going to
process
allow.
we have now of, the RFPs and all that stuff, I think, the more ironed out it is for the future, the better off we are.
Right.
Okay, council members, what's the direction you want to take? Councilmember Peñalosa?
On the TOT, then we can go anywhere between 10 to 12%.
Yeah, and we've been in some pretty, not regular, but I will tell you, each time we talk with our consultants, they always say, you probably should look at your TOT, because you're at the bottom. Now, not everybody imposes a TOT, so I want to be clear that that's an elective measure, which right now I would say of those that have TOTs, and here's what I would say, it generates half million or so a year, which even if you did increase to 12, if you do the math, you're talking about an additional 250,000. It's real money, I'd be the first to say, but there's a lot of folks that are looking at a rebound, and they're kind of looking at the rebound of tourism in the 2021. So they're trying to look at, trying to take advantage of what will probably be a bounce back. And especially, there's a sense that due to COVID, there won't be significant, there'll be, and I think Porterville's in a unique circumstance here in this. One, air travel is going to be down. Folks are not going to be looking to spend their vacation time at Disneyland or in when they open. And then they are looking for outdoor, non-congested types of things, which I think lends itself a lot to some of the Mighty 190 efforts, I would say. So you know, being in preparation for a bounce back, I would say in 2021 may not be a bad strategy in looking at what's called the bed tax, looking at that prospect. And I would say that I would say Muni Services, or Avenues as they're called now, would probably talk 12%. That's kind of the industry standard. But we can present that information at your direction.
I'd like to see the 12%, because you're just getting direction now, right?
Right. Did you even, you know, this is kind of, did you want us to bring something back at your July 7th meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, the city's already undertaken the initiative with the Mighty 190, and so we have the ability to actually deliver on something back from that. So it's a great discussion.
I'd like to see it come back with the 12% and also the Wood Lake ordinance, including, did you say the retail, to expand it?
So, well, we were talking retail, but then also other types of businesses such as cultivation and, I'm trying to think what else there is.
So there
Distribution.
were 4 specific recommendations of the ad hoc committee, which was Vice Mayor Reyes and Councilmember Peñalosa, and it was cultivation. The cultivation had there were 2 areas of cultivation, because they're a separate license. It's small, it's what's considered small indoor cultivation, and it's limited, it's a factor of canopy size.
Like 500 square feet or something less than that?
It's not the size of the building, it's how many plants and what becomes the space. It's consistent with the state's licensing, it's how they license things. And then they also, in the cultivation, is what's called a nursery, which is you never allow the plants to grow, and I'm outside of my expertise here, but you grow them from seeds, and then when they hit a certain maturity, they sell them to other grow facilities. And then distribution was another area of licensing, and testing, which has also been an area which, you know, kind of lends itself to our area, given the agricultural pieces. And unfortunately, we used to have a agricultural testing facility here in Porterville, which got apparently outsourced through Fruit Grower Supply to over by Ventura area now is where that operation is now handling. But it is an area where is in great need in the state. Has had some supply chain issues because of product being held up because of lack of testing facilities. So there is some merits to looking at testing is also one of the authorized areas.
Well, I would include that as part of it, as recommended by the subcommittee.
We're just providing direction here?
Yeah.
What was the percentage you guys wanted on that? Commensurate with what, the up to 10%?
For
For
cannabis?
cannabis?
I mean, if it's something that we can control to roll back to something that I think up to that's a good number for up to.
Okay. And then do you guys like the max of $25 per square foot? For, in the event other types of businesses were to be approved?
Yes.
Yeah, I think if that's the
It's one of the
information.
ones.
Yeah.
Those are all over the place. I was just looking, they're all over.
I mean, I think in putting this together, you kind of have an idea where, you know.
We've got and we can, you've got 3 examples in this county, right? You know, Wood Lake's probably got the most substantial.
And that was negotiated down too. I don't know what to, the $25. I know that was,
Yeah,
that
so
was
we can
negotiated.
kind of give you the lay of the land now as it's now on the other side, what it is. And then Farmersville and Lindsay both have operational dispensaries as well.
Mhm. But we can set below that and look at what makes sense
Okay.
depending on the types of businesses.
Which
and
I
what's
would say I hear business is good. That's what I'm told.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure, that's one thing, I would imagine the quarantine was good for the business.
Okay, so that,
Just gonna go out on a limb there.
okay. So if that's all we need to bring it back, I mean,
Yeah,
you've been
just,
given.
then you, yeah,
All
is
right,
there,
then
if there
we'll go.
was,
Anything else, council members? So we could,
We have direction, we know what.
we
can
already
bring
have
it forward.
direction, so we'll move on.
I would say, in all candidness, the City of Lindsay, well, Farmersville especially, and City of Lindsay have both said it probably is the one thing that's going to keep them this side of bankruptcy, or significant reductions of their organizations. So I would say, especially Farmersville has been the most candid about that. So thank you with that. Thank you for that direction.
We'll go on to the next.
All right, next item is consideration of a resolution of intent to commence proceedings in the issuance and sale of revenue bonds or other securities for sewer, storm drain, wastewater, water system capital improvement projects. And forgive me for it being so generic. Essentially, this is just an action as a placeholder, I would say, so that we can begin a shot clock. As we are, there's certain market volatility still in play right now, but there is a sense that the market is going to have some stabilization in it, and I'll use TCAG as a reference right now, which is looking to do bonding of about 80 million, I think is what they're looking at right now for some big project kinds of things. It could be more than that. Their ability to be rated for that bonding effort has been delayed by a month or two. So they were hoping to be issuing bonds, I would say this month, in the month of June and July, and it's probably going to be pushed to August, 1st of September. If we're going to be looking at bonding to capital projects, we're definitely going to want to be doing that before the November election. There's great uncertainty what the market's behavior will be, just the uncertainty of the election. So probably from a timing standpoint, we're looking at October, which would be to, and you'll see a large number in the resolution, and that is looking at some of the significant capital projects that are on the docket for the next 10 years or so, which most notably is tertiary treatment. A lot of these are as part of the casino relocation project, which has tertiary treatment as a critical, essential component of that development, as well as some storm drain improvements that need to occur, which the city's going to have a partial responsibility for, along with the tribe. So as you saw here, it's kind of all funds on deck and looking at what the capital project portfolio would be. My expectation is not that it would be 50 million. It would probably be something more in the magnitude of 30. But under the restrictions that these resolutions have, kind of keeping your place in line, you can do less, you just can't do more. So the request would be of the City Council that it consider adopting this resolution. This is a non-binding resolution. This essentially just establishes a point in time, which does have a look-back period of 60 days. We really don't have big water capital projects or other capital projects that have been accrued in the last 60 days. But we do have big projects that will be, you've already awarded pretty sizable water improvement projects as part of the Henderson Avenue reconstruction project, which is in excess of $1 million. And it's not to say that you don't have funds available for that, but this is going to be a conversation over the next 5 years or so of trying to do multiple things at one time, large-scale capital projects, improvements at the wastewater treatment facility, just a lot of different moving parts, which is going to have a number of funding sources, and I think in the ability to have bond funds available, which it's just going to be having the flexibility to be able to do multiple things at one time. Because I think there's going to be a tertiary treatment plant, wastewater system improvements, significant water replacement projects, all of these different combination things all happening at one time, and making sure you have all the funds available to be able to achieve those ends. And it's just not the water fund. We've also, I would say, already made significant in the sewer investment with the sewer expansion projects that are now being planned. So I would say the thrust of this is going to fall on the water and wastewater funds, with storm drain kind of in a lesser role. So with that, happy to answer any questions. And again, just want to emphasize, this is non-binding. Should we choose to proceed, there would be additional authorizations that would need to be provided. I would recommend that the ad hoc committee, you have an established kind of dealing with this, that spent a lot of time together looking at the sewer projects, that as we're going into the capital projects timeframe in October, that perhaps there's a check-in with that ad hoc committee, which is Councilmember Garola and Councilmember Peñalosa.
Okay. Council?
I would like to make a motion to move forward with the staff recommendation.
We have a motion by Councilmember Peñalosa for the staff recommendation,
I'll second.
and a second by Vice Mayor Reyes. Any further discussion? If not, call for vote, please.
Councilmember Gurrola?
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Reyes?
Yes.
Mayor Flores?
Aye, passes unanimous, 5-0. Thank you. We move on to the next item.
Thank you, Your Honor. Next item in order was a council member requested, I would say, agenda item that was authorized by the council to appoint Councilmember Garola as the alternative member on the Tulare County Economic Development Corporation, which does have an upcoming meeting in a couple of weeks.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and make a motion on the recommendation that,
I will second.
okay, no further discussion. Call for vote.
Councilmember Gurrola?
Let me see, yes.
Councilmember Peñalosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Reyes?
Aye.
Mayor Flores?
Aye, passes unanimous, 5-0. All right. Councilmember Grohl is going to a meeting.
All right. And it's going to be in person in Exeter at 7:30 in the morning.
I'm an alternate. Mr. Councilmember Peñalosa seems to be there first.
Okay, we will move on to,
Thank you, Your Honor. The final item this evening is your status and review of proclamation of local emergency due to COVID-19. I would say since your last review, there's been some continued significant process, I would say, by the state of California with an action that they took 2 weeks ago, which after your last meeting authorized certain outdoor recreational activities to open, including aquatic centers and other related facilities. And I know Mr. Moore has been waiting patiently because I do want to afford him some time, because I think he and his staff has spent some, have been preparing for this moment, so to speak, as best they can, and to have an active dialogue with the council with regards to its level of comfort in looking to reopen, as is now allowable, public pools and other aquatic facilities. In addition to that, the governor announced last Friday that we've seen a pattern now that apparently Friday afternoons is the time to talk about what's going to happen the next week. So last Friday, the governor made an announcement that those counties that have a variation attestation, which Tulare County is one, will allow some remaining stage 3 businesses to open as part of, as was referred to as 2.5. And so with that is coming nail salons, massage therapy, tattoo facilities, and the like. Still out there are some other high, what they call them, high-risk activities, but in large part, it's just kind of drawing the rest of those stage 3 businesses into the 2.5 area. So in fact, I had a conversation, I would say here locally, we continue to see an increase, and you can see every day the increase in cases. Talking with our medical professionals, they although we do see cases rising, the symptoms are not quite as bad, given that it's probably because it's summer and the heat does have a weakening factor, if I can call it that. That's comments that I'm hearing from the medical community, that even though cases are rising, the symptoms are not as severe as they saw, but they do anticipate that as we go through summer and go back into the fall months, that their speculation is that those symptoms will return in more severity as we get closer to that. I had a conversation today with Porterville College's foundation. They are looking, and they are authorized back in May, actually, with the opening of kind of when it happened along with shopping malls. Swap meets could open with certain guidances, which I talked today with Ramona Chiappa, who is executive director of the foundation and responsible for the swap meet. She's working with her board on a reopen date. They have not set a date for reopening, but I did appreciate her checking in with the city, knowing that's it is authorized by the state. They're also working with their liability insurance, because that's also been an important part of that component. Just because the state says it okay, you might want to check with if there's any additional requirements that your insurance carrier dictates. It is an activity, so they're also having to check because it operates on Porterville College's campus. They also are having to check with the Kern Community College District's insurance. So a number of different moving parts, and I did want to make mention of that, and I told Ramona that I would make mention of that to the council this evening. With that, if it pleases the council, I'd like to have Mr. Moore talk about kind of the precautions that they propose to put in place for the opening of Murray Park Pool. We have the splash pad at Fallen Heroes Park as well. And then they're kind of contrary to what some other cities are doing. They're actually looking at how, consistent with the state guidelines, there could be some recreational programs that could occur. So
Before we do that, can I just mention really quick that if you did want to do something about the business license deferral, you could do it under this one. Because we have any actions concerning related to COVID. Just wanted to bring that up if you don't want to wait till the next meeting. Okay.
Thank you for that.
All right, Donnie, you want to?
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lawless and Mayor, members of the council. Just starting with the pool, a few things that the staff, there's quite a long list. I've been on some aquatics calls every week, these Zoom meetings for the last couple months, and there's been a lot of good information when the time does come to open up the pool. So we feel confident in all these things that we've learned over the last couple months. Some of the main ones up there would be first, the 25% capacity that would be allowed in the pool. So the facility, the max capacity currently is 280. So we'd be looking at 70 at the most, which there's never everyone that we allow in the pool at one time in the facility in the water. So they're out of the 70, there'll still be some on the deck or different places at one time. The deck would look a lot similar to what you would probably have seen as far as the circles on the parks and things like that to keep the distancing. So we would put some markings on the deck area to keep families within these bubbles, if you will, and with the 6 feet apart. We would put little dots on the sidewalk outside of the facility and leading into the facility to keep people 6 feet apart as they're waiting to enter. One new thing we would also do would be to take advanced registration. So beginning of the day of every day, we would have a computer system. If people were able to access a computer to go ahead and register in advance, so we wouldn't have people waiting to get in. We would know, and those people would know exactly who they were that were allowed to get in at a certain time. So we would do 90-minute recreation swims. So say, for instance, we would open at 10 a.m. We would have a recreation swim from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And then from 11:30 to noon, we would be clearing everyone out, doing extra disinfecting, and then the next session would begin after that 30-minute period. For those that don't have computer access or couldn't figure that out, we would save some spots every day for people to call ahead of time and reserve their spot that way too. So let's see what else. And then as you're entering, we would do our screening criteria with some the symptoms questions that I'm sure you're aware of. And we would do the touchless temperature checks for staff and the public as they're entering. But we would do all we could to get them in as quick as possible, but they will be standing on their dots to keep their distancing as they're waiting to enter. We would also have one exit for those when they're asked to get out of the pool. And then that would be on the east side. We have a gate on the east side of the pool while the next people are arriving to wait to get in at a different, the main entrance. And so we'd keep them separated. They do not recommend any snack bars being open, so the snack bar up there would not be open. And also we would be having some extra signage up there to talk about the distancing inside and outside when they're waiting, extra disinfecting like I mentioned earlier. And I think those are the main, all the different safety procedures, the main ones that we would be looking at as we open the pool, if that is the council's desire. Mr. Lawless mentioned the splash pad. The recommendation on those, if they do get the okay to open, would be to probably have a staff member on site, because a distancing at a splash pad, they're basically looked at as a wet playground, more or less, is what we like to refer them to. So we would need someone, if there wasn't anyone there, but typically we don't have anyone staffing that splash pad in the summertime, which it does serve as one of our cooling centers, we like to say, and usually we open them weekends for 2 to 5 p.m. has been the past, in addition to if we do hit that consecutive heat wave of 3 days or more, we'll usually open it up to serve as a cooling center. But it would be recommended to have a part-time staff out there just solely to provide the mentorship, if you will, of the distancing. If not, there probably would be no distancing. Our splash pad is relatively small, and so we could work out something with our staff member to possibly have just family members, the same household that come together, be at the splash pad at one time, give them a certain amount of time, and then let them move out and the next people waiting to get in. So that's the pool. I'd be happy to talk more about some of our other programs we were looking at. One of the other ones was the day camp situation, which even since COVID began, there's been essential worker, childcare, and things like that. So from day one, some of that has never really shut down. But the way we'd be looking at it would be our summer day camp is what we usually call it. Instead of having 50 people, 50 students attend, we would have up to 20, and we would have recommendations would be one staff member to 10 children, and they would be in their own pod, so they would not interact. The 110 would not interact with the other 10. So gone would be the days of playing like a big game of dodgeball or something like that, which we absolutely love, but obviously we couldn't do that at this time. So we would keep them separated. We would have one extra staff person that would solely be basically following the groups as they move from one activity to the other, which a lot of activities, when we can, weather permitting, would be outside, especially the first half of the day, which is highly recommended. Keeping our distancing, doing a lot of extra during the water breaks and things like that, where they bring their own water bottles. We'd be doing a lot of extra disinfecting at that time. Highly minimizing shared equipment, shared crafts and games and stuff like that. We wouldn't be doing those type of things as you typically would. But we're confident in our staff and the ability to program and do some creative ways of keeping the distancing and doing all those important things. But another thing that they recommend, which we would do, would be as a drop-off takes place, we'd have a parent text our staff phone inside, as opposed to having a parent get out, walk them inside. It's recommended to not have the parents all congregate and drop them off physically. So there's a bus turnaround right outside of the Santa Fe School gymnasium, multi-purpose room, where we would be holding our summer day camp. So the parent would text our staff that they were getting out of the car, we'd be looking for them to come in, and once we received them inside, our staff would text them back to acknowledge, and that would be the sign-in of the child to our care, basically. So different things like that we were going to be implementing. And then a few other fun activities that we were thinking that we could definitely do this summer. Gone are the days, at least as of now, are the leagues and the scrimmages and things like that as far as sports go, but we could definitely feel like we could do a volleyball. We've been doing summer volleyball for youth for the last few years. It's been very popular. And so this summer, if we kept it to a lot smaller group where we just have 10 inside the gymnasium at one time as opposed to 20 on 2 side courts, we would just do 10 with 1 coach, and we would have 10 different color volleyballs. So the participants would know that you're assigned this navy blue ball, and you're not supposed to touch any of the other balls while you're in there the whole time. And the only interaction with the volleyball is between the participant and the 1 staff member, which again would be tested. The temperature checks would take place. The screening would take place for the staff and the kids as they arrive. Parents would not be recommended inside to watch the hour-long practice. We would do things like every 20 minutes, we would do a water break. They'd bring their own water bottles. Not do the drinking fountain. We would do hand sanitizing during that water break time. So those are some things that we feel that we could do, and just all kinds of drills. And we'd do some creative drills, including some fitness inside there. We do stretching and things like that. So it'd be a 1 hour, 60-minute, keep the kids moving, pretty high intensity, fun hour-long practice. And then instead of doing games and scrimmages, which kids love to do, and that's the most fun thing, they usually do not like practicing and things like that. But we would do instead an end of the season, which would probably be like a little 4-week season. We would do a competition that last Saturday. And so there would be skills competitions where instead of playing games against the other teams that are involved in our little clinic, if you will, there would be some points accrued for different skills competitions that we set up, so we could still determine winners for the teams, and that would reward them for practicing and building up to this one day. So I won't go into more details. I'd be happy to answer more questions, but just a couple other things we were talking about doing. A little kids cross-country season. We haven't done cross-country running before, so we have tons of great resources in the city as far as the high school programs go, phenomenal cross-country programs. And I know that they would be willing to help assist with that. Once again, keeping it 10 kids in little groups, and we could do all sorts of fun activities with the different age groups on cross country. Potentially a golf skills competition out at the golf course. Once again, not involving like hands-on lessons with the golf pro, but we have a set, like a sanction, it's called a drive, pitch, and putt contest. So it's similar to ones we've done before where we do pitch, hit, and run with the baseball, and we do punt, pass, and kick with the football. Well, they have a golf one where we could do for kids, and then we could even hold that for adults as well. We know the adults are itching to get out and do some things. One thing I forgot to mention with the cross country, I think we would market it where we would love to have the parents come out as well, and they could do some walking or jogging as we're watching their kids for an hour do their exercise. That gives them a chance to get out of the house and potentially walk around Veterans Park or wherever we have the cross country. So we'd be kind of tailoring to the parents as well as the kids on the cross country. And then cornhole is something else that's very popular. I did actually see this on ESPN recently. It's pretty interesting, but every individual that participates, they have their own 4 bags designated, so there's no cross-contamination of touching other bags. The officials have gloves on. They're the only ones that touch the bags once they hit the cornhole board. Everyone's at one end. Usually you used to see opponents stand next to the board on opposite sides of the board. Well, now you keep 6 feet away. As soon as one person tosses their bag, then they leave the board, the other person approaches it. So there's all sorts of things in place these days for the distancing and sanitation and all that. So those are a few ideas we have. We're chomping at the bit to get going and put some of these out there for the community. And we really feel that, they're ready to do a few things as well. So I appreciate the time, and I love talking recreation, so I could talk all night, but I'll stop right there.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Hey, Donnie, it's Monty. Is there any discussion out there about disc golf? Because hearing what you're saying about cornhole, because I was concerned because there's a goal there that's kind of shared, but with cornhole, there's sort of a hole that can be like, can you tell me a little bit about where disc golf is?
Yes, that's a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. That's something else on our radar, and for the disc golf, what we would love to do with that, as opposed to the disc hitting the chain and dropping inside of a basket where you have to reach inside and get your disc. There's ways of putting like a shield on the outside of the chains, and so the disc, as long as it hits, it'd be almost like putting a trash can or something, like you're hitting a target where it bounces back to you, similar to what they're doing at the golf course, where instead of the ball going into the hole is elevated so the ball just ricochets off of the hole. Be the same thing for disc golf. So that would be my suggestion. I haven't seen that before, but I was thinking about disc golf, and I'd love to incorporate that as well, get that going for kids or adults, or that'd be a great sport, just like the cornhole, to have like a father-son or a mother-daughter or whatever, just family members of adults and kids get out there and do something like that. They'd have their own discs, and so they wouldn't have to worry about the cross-contamination on that. So appreciate you bringing that up. We could definitely pull that off.
Thank you.
Johnny, what was the intervals of being in the pool? How much time?
We're looking at 90 minutes.
Oh, 90 minutes.
90 minutes, yes. Our evening recreation swim used to be an hour and a half, and so that's what we would do with this one. And we probably could get in about 5 90-minute segments throughout the day. The one thing that I didn't talk about was the swim lessons, which they do not recommend at this time, just due to the lack of the distancing abilities. And so that would give us a little bit more time throughout the day to do a couple more sessions of the rec swim.
So I have 2 more questions. So other than in the pool or at the splash pad, would individuals on the deck or observing or in the corn hall thing, would they be required to wear masks?
It's recommended, and that could be up to the council if they would require that. It is recommended anytime that you have to break that 6-foot barrier, to wear the mask. So that is recommended. Our pool staff would be wearing them anytime they had to go, say, in the restroom to clean the restrooms or whatever, where the public's going to be. It's obviously not recommended for the lifeguards to wear them up on the deck if they have to jump into the water. But they would be having masks and would be wearing them. But yes, for the public, we would do all we could to, like I mentioned earlier, keep the distancing, but that is something that it is recommended.
Okay. So the last ones are, you just mentioned it, so the restrooms will be open at the pool. They'll just be cleaned.
They would be cleaned, and it's also recommended to say that there's 3 stalls. They actually recommend even blocking off the middle one, just to keep even that more distance if people were to come out at the same time. So we would be looking at things like that as well. They'd be highly disinfected and cleaned every 90 minutes.
Okay. And the last question is for the city attorney. Does the city have any liability when we open up if somebody were to get the COVID?
Potentially, I mean, I can never say never. I mean, we have some immunities, but what I would recommend, which is what everybody's doing, is that waivers be signed as part of the process.
We've actually added, I've been starting to work on a draft with Ms. Hildreth on, there's some verbiage that a lot of cities are using, just an extra line regarding that. And so we would be running that by Ms. Liu as well.
It's been added to virtually every waiver that I've signed in the last two months. So, all businesses, all activities are doing that. In fact, we're going to engage in a recreational activity on Friday, and it involves waiver on specifically related to COVID as well as other things.
And I appreciate the question, council member, because you're the only one having this conversation in Tulare County, because the city of Porterville is the only one that has a municipal pool. It is unique to Porterville to even have this conversation, and which is why, you know, we want to be so careful is the word, or abundance of caution, and it's a great question. We've been following the state. That doesn't mean that it's, and that's why I said, Donnie, we really need to check in with the council and make sure that they are, you know, that they, I said, subject to their approval. Just because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should. What I appreciate about what Mr. Moore and his staff has been focusing on, and because I will tell you, their colleagues across this county are, in essence, there's folks that are being laid off. So they're just, and is then an alternative, trying to find how we can continue to serve the community with recreation, with the challenges, and taking necessary precautions to at least provide some type of programs.
Thank you, Donnie, for the work, you and the staff.
I have one comment if I may, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Donnie, you mentioned that the guards would not have a mast on the deck, and I would recommend that they do so, even if they have to jump in. You know, it's not going to hurt them, but, you know, but I would think they should wear masks. All employees should wear masks.
Okay.
That's just my recommendation, thought about it.
I want to say thank you. You've taken a lot of steps, Donnie, and so many different activities and a lot of things to put into play, especially with regard to the pool. I'm sure you were probably received a phone call and said, you guys can go ahead and open up, and but not to proceed with caution, and I love the caution and waiting and following the protocols, and with regard to the disinfecting and the cleaning, and just thank you for that. And then with the ideas of the other activities, it's good. It's good to hear it.
Thanks.
Because
One more question for Donnie real quick. Donnie, I left you an email regarding a drive-in theater. Would that be possible?
We've looked at that. We definitely have all the logistics. We just didn't feel we were quite ready to promote a ton of cars in one place yet, but we definitely have all the homework done on doing something like that, and we do have a gigantic inflatable screen.
Exactly. That's the reason I mentioned.
Yeah, probably made Miss Graybell's night, 'cause I'm sure she's watching on YouTube right now. She's been the one eager to put that on. So we were just waiting till we get a little bit more okay to have a larger gathering, even though they would stay in their car. But yeah, we're looking into that.
We can space the cars, you know, so, or only have so many.
Right.
Maybe two could, you know, they could reserve a spot, or if you.
It's
but that's just
making sure
more
everybody's
event that you can have.
Yeah, no, we're all for it. I think we have it dialed in, so we could look into that for sure.
I think the key to that is making sure everybody actually stays in their cars.
Yeah,
Tendency to want to congregate so that becomes the issue in those kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, and then what are the restroom facilities? I mean, there's some logistics that have to be worked through that. There's been some experiences with that haven't gone really well, because how do you keep people in their cars? I have heard of that issue.
Thank you very much. Council members, which direction?
I say we move forward with it. He's covered all the bases. Good job.
Absolutely.
Well, I didn't want to do something without checking in, when I say me, Donnie.
You could do a motion to give Donnie a green light to pursue recreational activities, provided they're consistent with state guidelines and the public safety precautions.
And he's been working with risk management, ensuring our liability questions and those sorts of things. So those are all great questions, and really why I wanted to be sure we weren't ahead of, even though we could, not to do it ahead of the council. because it is unique to Porterville. This is a unique conversation that nobody else could have.
And we could include that we would continue with the executive order with the state guidelines?
Right.
That's what I'm saying, that we could continue,
And-
that we would add that to that.
Yeah, and I think, similar to the golf course where we require participants to wear masks, it's not a bad idea to have our lifeguards always wearing face coverings as just an example to folks for good practice.
And the public, when they're not involved in any participants or watching, should all wear masks as well. So before we go off this item, we're still open for discussion for a couple of other things outside of Donnie's presentation.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention a couple of other things as well, so yeah, certainly.
So I have the Freedom Fest. We are going to make sure that FYI changes the misinformation they're providing.
Yeah, I know that efforts are being made to correct that. I don't know why that would be being reported that way.
They have started to report it, that they were incorrect, so.
Good. So the other is that, from what I understand at this time, we can motion to defer the business license to January 2021 for Tier 1 and 2.
Correct.
So that's a motion.
I think we need a summary of a motion here.
That was,
because
the motion was to defer. So we had the discussion earlier about the business license
Yes.
fees. And I just wanted to point out that here you can actually do it because you actually include in your action the ability to go ahead and make changes commensurate with the fact that we're in an emergency.
And actually, Ms. Beams
related to the order.
is wanting instead of saying specifically Tier 1 and 2, that it's those business licenses subject to the $25 semi-annual.
I meant that to those that are,
Oh, gotcha.
applies to those that have the $25 fee.
Okay. And that we continue with the executive.
Oh, we continue with the
executive order.
Executive order, or the declaration of emergency.
and resolution.
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
proclamation of emergency that you're continuing, and a green light for Donnie to continue with his activities.
With that summary and
All that stuff.
with that summary and that motion, I'm going to second. There are no further discussion. Let's call for vote.
Councilmember Gurrola?
Aye.
Councilmember Peñalosa?
Aye.
Councilmember Stowe?
Sure, yes.
Vice Mayor Reyes?
Aye.
Mayor Flores?
Aye, passes unanimous, 5-0. Yay, I saw that, Donnie. I see the thumbs up. Okay, we'll move into oral communications. Are there any oral communications that came in electronically?
There has one that, I'll read it. From Catherine Capone, or Kathy Capone, thank you for continuing to support the Tulu River Parkway Phase 3. Thank you.
Thank you. No other oral communications. We'll move on to other matters. Councilmember Gurrola.
Yes, I just wanted to take this time I'm really proud to be a city council member for the city of Porterville, and proud of all the staff, because you know how generous we have been at a time where other cities, as a city manager has mentioned, that we helped a disadvantaged community with water during the drought. We're, suspending late fees in the water. We've got, we're deferring the business fee. We've just done so much to help our community. And we've been able to do this again because we have maintained a solid budget. So I just want to thank everybody who's been a part of that again. I'm just really proud that we can do that for our community, and as well as helping even the developers, and so that we can come to at least a medium where, they're getting something and we're getting something in return as well. So I think all in all, it's been very good.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Stowe.
I have nothing at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Peñalosa.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I would like to wish all the fathers a happy Father's Day this upcoming weekend. And we got some amazing fathers out there that have supported their families and continue to support their families. So shout out to them and to every one of them. Also, it's June is Pride Month, so I just want to say that I stand with our gay community, and everybody is part of our community in whatever, no matter who they are and who they choose to love. So also want to just give appreciation to our city manager, our city staff, our directors, as they have worked from tragedy that happened earlier this year to everything that's been happening up until to this point. So want to just share my appreciation as a member of a council and a member of this community, and I am proud to as well, seconding some of the comments that Councilmember Gurrola mentioned, that it's really, I'm proud of our community, and also just proud of my colleagues on the dais, the mayor, the vice mayor, everybody. We're continuing to uplift our community on many different fronts at the same time, and so just appreciate everybody and all the work that we're putting in.
Thank you very much. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Peñalosa, I don't know that I can top that. A lot of the same sentiments that I was thinking, especially with our staff having been put through the ringer here in some recent months, as well as a lot of us, everybody in town. So thank you for those words. About the only thing that I have to say too is that there's a lot of us are owners of dogs and animals, and people are lighting off fireworks consistently on a nightly basis, and a lot of those animals are becoming traumatized and running away, and a lot of times some of us that's some of the only comfort that we can have in some terrible times. So if you have any control over anyone doing that, I urge you to request that they stop lighting off illegal fireworks for the sake of our entire community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to echo and chime in a little bit with the fireworks, because since graduation, every day since in different areas, they start going off about 8:30 till almost 10 o'clock. And sometimes people are just driving in communities and just throwing and lighting and then taking off. But it has gone on for a little too long, and yes, I echo that with the fireworks and with the dogs. But I also want to say thank you to the continued efforts of the Community Development Department, Ms. Byers, and Mr. Reidenauer and Ms. Calderon, because even though it may have ceased for a moment through COVID, we're moving right along with the census outreach. And it's amazing where Porterville is at as far as the numbers, and I think we just topped the state average. And I believe there's also efforts that's going to be going out electronically within the next few days, and to that regard. But even though there's been a lot of things, I am looking for the resiliency of this community, and I wish everyone that is the happy Father's Day. I see a lot of happy faces, even if they're wearing a face mask. And so with that being said, Mr. Lawless.
Yeah, just a couple things, and apologize for some of the technical issues that we had. We tried to give a better setup here, and I think that some of the new features that we were trying to make the job easier, I think, well, it might have, you can play through things, but it's not when you're actually, it's like you can hit batting practice, but then you see the actual 95-mile-an-hour fastball with with some bend on it, it makes it, yeah, so I apologize for that. I think Fernando kind of figured it out, some subtleties of the new system that he's got. Yeah. And speaking of just, the staff's been great, lots of moving around here in City Hall with the continued cleaning going on, and folks have been great here. It's been a number of staff working very closely to make sure that stays on task and moving forward. And we'll finish at City Hall this week and move over to Station 1 next week. Just as an update to that, wanted to wish the mayor a very happy birthday. Which was last week. And then, and with that, just thank you for the council's time and support. And even though this was going to be a long, that 5 Tuesday month, apparently we missed council meetings so much that we needed to do a budget adoption on June 30th.
Well, thank you very much for everything. It is 9:47. Meeting adjourned.